Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Let Us Head Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Gamer Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Hey Izuku, guess what time it is? His mother called. Izuku gasped, the widest smile spreading across his face shortly after. Now that the party was over and all of his friends have left, presents, he cheered, sprinting at his mother with glee. Ever since his 4th birthday when he got that diagnosis, he never got presents from anybody. All of so-called friends would do is steal his cake and nab all of his gifts for themselves, especially Kaken. But ever since he moved to his new school, he had tons of new friends to invite to his birthday party. Real friends that didn't care about the fact that he was quirkless and loved to play games and laugh with him instead of at him. Jumping with as much glee as an 8-year-old in an All Might hoodie could muster, he lunged at the present that his mom was holding, snatching it away from his mother's hands in an instant. He started ripping apart the wrappings before his mother could even blink. Once she got over her brief surprise, she smiled at her Izuku being so happy now. Moving away from Aldera was the best decision she could have made, because now she could see her son smile. Really smile. Instead of seeing the mask that screamed "I quote am fine" when he clearly wasn't, she could see the bright grin that he should have been known for rather than some arbitrary title. The stress that's been eating away at her since Hisashi's passing has ceased. Now she was finally able to see that her son's quirklessness was not a disability, but rather just another unique aspect of him. She could now truly see Izuku, a child that gave the world twice of what he had and deserved thrice of what the world had given him. Her thoughts were interrupted by a shrill squeal as Izuku looked at the $100 Blizzard gift card in awe. "Mom, is this for me?" She kneeled down next to him with a smile. She knew just how much her son wanted to. Of course it is Izuku. Who else would it be for? Stunned silence. Izuku's mother suddenly began to panic as tears suddenly spilled out of his eyes, but was quickly relieved when she saw him smile through it all. Snot dripped out of his nose and rivers of happy tears flowed down his cheeks. Thank you," he stuttered, wiping his eyes furiously. "Thank you, Mom." Rushing to get a box of paper tissues, she quickly showered her son with lots of warm hugs and comforting praise. For the first time in 3 years, both Izuku and his mother were able to enjoy his birthday party. Loading cutscene. Ever since the infamous Quirk Wars, most if not all major companies were wiped from existence as the world was thrown into complete chaos. The global economy was practically forced to start from scratch as society dealt with the introduction of quirks. When everything was somewhat stabilized and all the copyrights for pre-quirk brands were lost, there were quite a few industries that had to rethink how they went about things. Fashion basically became a line of support clothing in order to accommodate those with mutations or uncontrollable quirks. Several different sports had to be reworked or reinvented to account for those with flying or strength quirks. The entertainment industry, however, remained mostly untouched. And by untouched, that meant only the principles of games and social media remained the same, while all the companies were in absolute shambles from having lost their copyrights. Many previously popular brands were forced to either invent something entirely new or brush off some dust and reintroduce pre-quirk products. Surprisingly, the latter were far more successful. While some weren't taken too well, most remained fairly popular and well-liked due to the core aspects being entertaining from the get-go. HeroTube, Slapchat, and Bonfire were absolute hits to name a few. The same went for games, from mobile apps such as Sugar Rush to building simulators such as Rise of Quirks. But Izuku wasn't interested in those games at the moment. No, because for the longest time now, he has found an interest that nearly rivaled his hero addiction. And considering that his entire room was nothing but All Might memorabilia, that was saying something. While all of the other kids in his classes geeked out about heroes and nothing but, he had an additional interest in the form of shooter games. Recently, Izuku had been watching several streamers on Flinch record themselves playing pre-quirk games. The original purpose of these videos was to see what games were like before the dawn of quirks. However, they could have never anticipated their audience developing an interest in the games themselves and start playing the games purely for fun. Before anyone knew it, a minor but tightly knit community was formed. It was a moss pit of all sorts of shooters, from free-for-alls to tactical FPS to RPGs. It was certainly a niche group, but one that caught Izuku's attention nonetheless. CSGO, Overwatch 3, Valorant for all 6 of the Borderlands series, various Halo games, League of Legends, TF2, all of them practically grabbed his attention by the chin and yanked it to various lengthy playthroughs and several small but nevertheless entertaining content creators. He'd regale his mom with funny moments from all of these YouTubers, and insist on rewatching playthrough after playthrough hundreds of times. And now, he could join them. Overwatch was going to be the first, obviously. While other games might be just as if not more fun, their characters could really only be seen as morally gray at best. In Overwatch, however, the way all the characters were either seen as heroes or villains with various powers resonantly with him the most. He always dreamed of being able to protect his team like none other with Reinhardt's shield, or be the support his team always needed as Mercy or Ana. Who knows, maybe he'll embrace his dark side and main Reaper or Sombra to sow chaos in the enemy ranks. Or perhaps pick off enemies at a distance with Widowmaker. The options were truly endless, once he ran through the tutorial and optimized his sensitivity. He went into a game and eventually decided on picking Soldier 76 to get used to the controls and abilities. While he did watch dozens upon dozens of Overwatch videos, he wasn't stupid enough to believe that knowledge equated to experience. The rest of his teammates picked various other characters to install, locking Genji and Roadhog, causing the two others to pick Ana and Mercy to complement their picks. Izuku could hear their mental sighs of anguish from his room, feeling sorry but not sorry enough to switch. The game started and Izuku was quick to type in the chat to greet his teammates, adding that it was his first game and to treat him well, while the rest of his team remained silent. The Ana opened up her chat and returned his greetings with mild enthusiasm, welcoming him to the game and to do his best. It was from that moment on that Izuku silently swore with freshly generated tears that he would try his hardest to win this game, no matter what the other team had to throw at him. Thankfully, his team held strong against the opposition. Granted, it was more so his significantly more experienced teammates that carried the match. The enemy Widowmaker constantly lost the duels between her and the Ana, and their Sigma with the other supports could hardly push forward with Genji and Roadhog picking them off at every opportunity. Izuku did his best to fend off an opposing Cassidy, continuing to do so when he switched to Reaper, but it was more so their Hog that constantly hooked him. The match was over when their Genji dashed into the air, signaling for Ana to nano-boost him. Once she fired her ultimate, he proceeded to devastate the entire team, getting 3 ends while Izuku with the help of their Mercy proceeded to pick apart the two stranglers. "I've got you in my sights," Izuku squealed with ecstasy as the rest of his team activated their own respective ults and the game was handed to them on a silver platter. What happened next should have been a normal celebration as Izuku won his first Overwatch game, the first of undoubtedly many to come. Yes, that's what should have happened. But as Izuku jumped up from his chair in excitement and proceeded to mime Soldier 76 using his ultimate with an invisible visor and pulse rifle to celebrate, green particles suddenly appeared, rippling across his body. He yelped as green pixels washed up and down his figure, an orange screen sliding over her eyes that seemed to be the visor. Fumbling with the rifle that was magically thrust into his hands, his jaw went slack with awe as his eyes scanned the sleek design and fingers gripped the trigger. The design was smaller to accommodate for his size, but there was no doubt that this was Soldier 76 Seconds Heavy Pulse Rifle. Being an intelligent 8-year-old, Izuku responded appropriately. MOOM. Loading cutscene. "Well, it's official," the doctor chuckled. "Your son has been misdiagnosed. He has a quirk." Shocked silence was all they could convey as both the Midoriyas stared at him, jaws on the floor with widened eyes. His mother was first to recover, albeit barely. "You mean it? He has a quirk," Izuku finished. I have a quirk." "Why yes," he confirmed. "Turns out Tsubasa didn't do anything beyond the extra joint test, which I consider quite absurd considering that test has been fairly inaccurate for a while now. A proper brain scan would have at least confirmed if you had a quirk factor, though perhaps a dormant one. Then again, who knows what that old quack has been up to since he left Mustafa." The two ignored his rambling as they continued to struggle to process it. "What did you say was the trigger again?" the doctor asked. I was playing a video game, Overwatch, and I was just mimicking one of the characters. And then, I was holding his gun." "Well then there you have it. A gaming quirk, and a powerful one at that." As both of the Midoriyas struggled to pick up their jaws off the floor in sheer awe, Midoriya managed to stammer out his question. "A gaming quirk? Why yes, a quirk that is related to the properties of a game, quite rare indeed. From what it sounds like, it's as simple as when you play the game, you are able to summon a character's abilities and weapons. While further testing is required, it seems to be unrestricted by levels or experience considering the fact you used your power when you just bought the game. Very powerful in my opinion." "Why was it so late?" his mom asked. "Most gaming quirks are quite latent. That's just how they are depending on how obscure their activation requirements are," the doctor explained. In China, most gaming quirks often appear in one's teens or even young adults due to the fact they didn't fit whatever requirements their quirk needed. Add on to that the general rarity of gaming quirks, and many can go their entire lives without knowing they possess one. He explained. "For example, I know a young girl and boy from a colleague in Petersburg, siblings in fact, and they never discovered their quirk until their late 30s when they decided to learn how to play chess for whatever reason. Now they're globally ranked as 2 of the top grandmasters due to their quirk allowing them to run chess games through a mental program. predicting every possible outcome of the match before it's even started. Magnus and Judith, Grandmaster Duo. Izuku blurted. They hold and stream tournaments online in Shanghai and Moscow, and the only one to come even close to beating them was Nedzu himself. The doctor blinked before chuckling. Quite right, my boy. I take it you are a fan. Izuku blushed as his mother laughed with him. Yeah, he loves all sorts of games, mostly pre-Quirk era. It's nearly as big as his hero addiction, if not bigger. I guess it finally paid off, I suppose. Quite indeed, he agreed. With so many quirks with such vague or impractical activation requirements, you are fairly lucky that he discovered his thanks to his addiction. Although I suppose that same addiction could be caused by your quirk in the first place. Oh, who knows? Either way, he has his quirk now and he seems quite ecstatic to have it. Saying he was ecstatic would have been listing All Might as a B-tier hero. He could hardly stay still in his seat as all the possibilities of being a hero suddenly flooded back through his head. He imagined himself with the powers of the Dragonborn from Skyrim, able to blast away villains with a single shout akin to Present Mike. He imagined a world where he could visit hospitals with his trusty medigun or healing rod as medic or mercy respectfully, being a beacon of hope to those in need. He imagined dueling villains left and right with the infinite arsenal of weapons and powers the Immortal Kombat cast offered him. Hell, maybe even mobile games would work and he would be able to summon armies with the click of a finger, similar to Trials of Tribes. He could imagine being a hero. All of a sudden his enthusiasm came to a halt, much to the confusion of his mother and the doctor. Izuku, what's wrong? His mom asked, eyebrows pressed together with lines of worry. Do you think I can be a hero? He asked hesitantly, as if whether he got to keep his newfound quirk hinged on this doctor's response. The doctor blinked once more before responding quickly. Why, of course. Why wouldn't you be? I mean, the powers you would obtain would be reliant on whatever games you decide to play and the limits set within it. But I've heard of quirks far weaker and yet the individuals wielding them continue on to be fine heroes. Yes, if you continue to train this quirk of yours, I'm certain that you will make a fine. I'm sorry, did I say something wrong? Izuku shook his head rapidly as he wiped away a ludicrous amount of tears, desperately trying to clean up his dripping nose with his sleeve to no avail. The doctor didn't bother getting a tissue box and opted to call for a janitor. He resisted the urge to snort as he saw Midoriya's mother apologizing profusely to the kindly man, rambling on about genetics and such as the janitor waved away her concerns. Eventually, the doctor asks what Izuku wants to name his quirk. He thinks about an article he read about, remembering several complicated words such reality emulation chambers and some other terms. He asked his mom the definition of virtual embodiment. He answers, smiling through his tears, the ability to embody virtual characters, and the quirk of a future pro hero. He thought blissfully. Loading cutscene. A man in a dress shirt and square glasses walked into the classroom with a smile, taking note of one Izuku. Midoriya practically vibrating in his seat. Good morning, class. Good morning, Tajiro-san. The class droned. So today we have a brief announcement to make before we start with our lesson. Midoriya, could you please step up? Midoriya nodded ecstatically as he walked out of his seat, his usual nervousness and anxiety replaced by a concerning amount of energy that was unnatural for the boy. Several classmates began murmuring as they wondered what could have possibly gotten the boy this excited. As Midoriya stepped up to the head of the class, the teacher cleared his throat to silence the hushed whispers. So, we are all aware of Midoriya's quirklessness since the beginning of the year, correct? Slowly, the class nodded, not a single one sneering or giving him looks of pity, a fact Izuku was proud to share. The teacher continued, while I must warn you all to allow this not to change your perception of Midoriya. We have recently gotten notice from the principal and a well-trusted doctor that this is no longer the case. If it wasn't for the teacher's quirk, whistle, the class would have gotten into an uproar with excitement, confusion, and doubt. As the class immediately fell silent, the teacher picked a few students for questions. A boy with a bowl cut was the first to answer. What do you mean he just got it? Don't we all get our quirks at 4? Good question. The answer is yes and no. While most quirks do appear by the age of 4 or at least 5, there are a few exceptions where this is not the case. Can anybody tell me why? The teacher pointed at another raised hand for their answer. Because some quirks are hard to use. Or maybe it needed something to be used. The brown-haired student answered, unsure as she rubbed the back of her ponytail. The teacher nodded in approval. Correct. Quite a few quirks need something in order to use them, such as Fatgum needing the proper fats to use his. Any other questions? A few more students raised their hands. Yes, a student with large protruding canines asked. What did Midoriya need to activate his quirk? Actually, what is it? Good question. Midoriya, if you would. Of course, Midoriya chirped. Apparently I had to start to play video games for my quirk, giving me the power to turn into the characters I played depending on how long I played the characters myself. The class let out a collective ooh as their imaginations went overdrive, picturing the possibilities. Wait a minute. so he gets to train his quirk by playing video games. Lucky, a boy with pink curls whined, earning chuckles from his fellow classmates and the teacher himself. All right, one last question before the start of class, the teacher asked, clasping his hands together. Only one student had their hand up to be called upon, a tired student with a heavily dyed mohawk. Can you get to showing us your quirk? She bluntly asked. Both Izuku and the teacher blinked, before Izuku smiled and said, sure. Before the teacher could react, viridescent lights flashed over Izuku as everyone covered their eyes from the bright pixelated particles that surrounded him. When they opened their eyes, they found Midoriya wearing heavy tactical coating, a blue jacket and thick black combat pants with red and white armor plating peeking underneath. On his face was a black mask with a red beaming visor obscuring his eyes. It would be considered nothing more than impressive cosplay if it wasn't for the fact he was wielding a heavy pulse rifle with it. Shocked silence as the students and teacher collectively gaped, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. He whisked the items away with a sheepish smile on his face. So, yeah, that's my quirk. What do you guys think? Once the children quieted down from their excitement and the teacher got a chance to lightly chide him for quirk use and remind him of the legality of it, the day sped by all too quickly for Midoriya. One thing was for certain, though. His journey to becoming a future pro hero was certainly going to be an interesting one. Yes, and he would embrace the experience with open arms, with nothing would be able to stop him. So, you wanted to talk, Kakin? Izuku asked, nervously twiddling his fingers as he very carefully avoided his old frenemy's eyes. The other refused to meet his gaze as well. Izuku already knew that he was pissed, but this wasn't the kind of piss that he was used to. The Bakugo he knew was always beat them up first, ask questions never kind of person. This quiet and subdued Bakugo that stood before him right now just didn't fit him in the slightest. It was unnerving. When he saw him earlier, he was acting normal. And by normal, Izuku means that the moment Bakugo saw him, he made it his prime directive to charge at his desk. First day of middle school. And the first thing he does is slam crackling fists on his desk, growling out questions and death threats. But no sooner had he snarled out, Deku, Izuku yelped up with surprise and instinctively turned into Bridget. A wave of pixelated particles washing over his body to summon orange lion-emblemed armor and a heavy mace in his hand before he just as quickly disassembled it, leaving him back in his school uniform. Well, leaving him back in his uniform and with several shocked students and one absolutely gobsmacked Bakugo Katsuki. Before Bakugo could even think about what to say, the teacher came in and chastised both of them for quirk use. While Midoriya profusely apologized to the teacher, Bakugo was still too stunned to respond. He eventually stumbled his way back to his seat when the teacher glared at him, another new experience for him as well. Once the introduction to the semester was finished and the teacher dismissed them for lunch, everyone from the class instantly stood up from their seats and rushed towards Izuku, asking for details about his quirk and complimenting him for its power. Ignoring the smoke slowly steaming from Bakugo's clenched fists, Midoriya answered their questions to the best of his abilities and shrugged off the compliments about his quirk when they came. Eventually someone did ask when and how he got his quirk, and although no one noticed the brief glance he unintentionally gave to Bakugo, Bakugo did. Bakugo very much noticed as Midoriya explained how he was a late bloomer since his quirk required him to play a video game before he could activate it. How he only received this quirk at the age of 8 during his time in a different elementary school that he moved to in order to escape the prejudices that came with being assumed quirkless. Bakugo tried especially hard, however, to ignore sympathizing comments from his classmates, all of them cooing over the misfortunes of being misdiagnosed and that whoever his bullies were got what was coming to them. Once the group of students finally got tired of Midoriya switching in and out from his impressive display of armor, Bakugo finally got the chance to approach him for answers. So far, it wasn't going so well, considering that neither had actually prepared anything to say. Eventually, Bakugo got tired of waiting and decided to go in guns blazing like he usually did. So you finally got your quirk. Izuku nodded. Virtual embodiment. Gives me the ability to copy the characters I play as depending on the amount of hours I play as them. So if I have 10 hours of playtime on a certain character, then I get to use that character's powers and weapons for 10 hours. Bakugo grunted, his expression unreadable. Sounds pretty powerful. Izuku rubbed the back of his head. And not really. Using some characters or their abilities really drains me. And the conversion for the hours is really finicky. Sometimes I'm not able to access some characters at all even if I have the hours. Or sometimes. He was cut off with a snarl from Bakugo. Shut the F up. No one wants to hear your damn rant. What I want to know is why the F didn't you tell me? Izuku tucked his head, suddenly finding his shoes very interesting. It's not that I didn't want to tell you. It's just I figured I'd just see you at middle school or UA since I only switched to a different elementary school. At this, Bakugo's eyes widened. You planning on going to UA? Why yes, Izuku stuttered, clenching his eyes shut as he sweated. Katsuki took a brief moment to contemplate this before snorting. Effin' finally. I was getting tired of waiting. With that one sentence, Izuku's jaw dropped. You were getting tired of waiting. He raised an eyebrow. Yeah, what about it? We always had that dream of becoming heroes together. But because your damn quirk took its effing time, that could never happen until it appeared. Izuku's confusion only grew. But you told me that you hated me. That you never wanted to see me again. I didn't want to see you without your quirk. He corrected him. You and your damn fever dream about being a hero were dead without it. But you kept trying to prove otherwise, looking down on my ass as if you thought you were so much better than me without your quirk. You even left the damn school cause you couldn't effing take the heat on your own like some weakling. Izuku underwent a brief shock before gritting his teeth. Looking down, Kaken, I did nothing but look up to you until I realized you wanted nothing to do with me. I only left to find friends who didn't care about my quirklessness. I left because I didn't want to see you and get hurt for it. This momentarily stunned Bakugo before he steeled himself by setting his jaw. You deserved it. You wouldn't learn otherwise. Learn what? That you can't be a hero without a quirk? Duh. And who are you to tell me that? Who are you to tell me that I couldn't be a hero if you were always going to be number one? Why do you care? Cause you were gonna be nothing but dead weight? Dumbass. Holy shit, what do you not get? He growled out, sparks rising out his fists once more. That's how it was always going to be. I become a hero, you become a weak Deku. I become the number one hero with a quirk to match. And you don't get either. That shit has been written until you finally got a quirk. Izuku could only bark out a dry laugh. Oh, so that justifies constant bullying. Looking down on others because they just have dreams or don't have cool flashy quirks like yours. If I was 5 years old again, maybe I would actually buy that shit. But you want to know what everyone else in my life thinks? What my mom thinks? Bakugo was taken aback by Izuku, of all people, cursing at him. What the hell do you mean? A villain Katsuki. They all told me that you were a damn villain that I was better off without. Shocked silence from both sides. Bakugo because he couldn't believe what he heard, and Izuku because he couldn't believe what he just said. And you know what? His voice was shaky with his throat dry and hoarse, but he was determined to remain resolute. I believed them. I really did, for the longest time. Oh, Auntie and Co really said that about me. For the first time ever, Bakugo's anger simply vanished. His voice was soft and not quite remorseful, but still jarring enough that it threw Izuku off. She said I was a villain. Regardless, he pressed onwards. Yeah, she did. She didn't want to make a big fuss with your mom about it since we were just kids, and I didn't want mom to lose her relationship with your parents. Though that didn't really work since she stopped talking with your mom a while ago anyways. Izuku swallowed as he looked down, avoiding the inevitable glare that Bakugo must have been giving him. It took me a long time to accept that I wasn't just some Deku but a person, Kaken. It took her a long time to convince me that I was a person worth loving just like everyone else even without my quirk. That I wasn't a waste of space or oxygen, but a person that was mistreated for something out of their control. I had friends that told me that quirkless didn't mean useless. Friends that didn't treat me any differently when I did get my quirk and didn't follow me around. And I don't care that you might think they're worthless. I don't care if you think I'm worthless or what any other quirkist bastards have to say about me or other quirkless people. Because even if I wasn't, I don't think I would ever work with a person who looks down others for their quirks. So if you won't protect them, if you dare target them, then I will stand in your way, Bakugo Katsuki. Quirk or no quirk, you won't win, he retorted, scowling as he tried his best to resummon his old ire. You'll get yourself ended, hurt Auntie in the process. Sure, maybe you're right there. But you know what? She told me that she was hurt more when she learned I lost you as a friend. Silence once more. She told me that she was hurt because no matter what she thought you'd protect me, no matter what happened. Even if the toughest villain was coming at us, she would never be worried if I became a hero, because she knew that you would be there too. Now she's afraid that if I become a hero that I'll one day have to work with you, and you'll target me first instead of the villain. Izuku, with tears in his eyes but a fiery determination that could have matched his late father, looked upon his old friend. She's scared of you, Kaken. Perhaps he would have added more or straight up left the conversation, if he wasn't shocked into silence when Bakugo only looked at him with wet eyes and glare focused into the ground. A noise that suspiciously sounds like a choked sob came from him. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Bakugo, Kaken, the strongest and most stubborn person he knew, was crying. This simply didn't compute with Izuku, whose only memories of Bakugo was him screaming and yelling at him. It was simply impossible for him to imagine Bakugo actually crying in front of him. To Bakugo, it would be the equivalent of admitting he's weak, an equally impossible task. You're not lying, are you? Izuku shook his head furiously, before watching in total surprise as Bakugo furiously wiped his sleeve against his eyes. Got him at Auntie, Bakugo muttered. Call Kaken. He tried. He reached out a hand only for it to be slapped away. He flinched and was prepared to tell him off when Kaken suddenly spoke, shattering his entire worldview in 4 words. Where do I start? None. I'm sorry, or I was wrong. But in some ways this was better, because unlike the other two that could have been said on a whim, this meant he was actually willing to try. Izuku's tears came flooding back. What do you mean? Bakugo growled, though it came nasally sounding with his voice cracking. Don't take this as an apology, Deku. The only person I'm gonna be sorry to is Auntie for having to deal with your wimpy shit and my shitty behavior. That's it. All right. Both of their breaths were shaky as they stood apart from each other on the street. I can't say I know what I did wrong, but if Inko is calling me a villain, if she's scared of me, then I know I effed up. Izuku sniffed. Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. I'm glad we had this talk. He nodded, eyes still downcast but expression more composed and resolved. As they both walked back home, they were both wary but somehow relieved of quite a lot of pressure. While what Bakugo said wasn't anything official or exactly heartwarming, it was a start and that's all that mattered for now. Loading cutscene. Hey nerd, what was the name of that game you were playing again? Izuku jumped at, head whipping around to his old frenemy as he barely managed to avoid collapsing to the sidewalk. Ever since Bakugo brought Midoriya over to his house and vice versa for the lengthy apologies and well regards, the two simply didn't talk often afterwards. They would never avoid each other. If one entered a room the other was in, it wasn't as though the other would purposefully leave. They simply found it complicated to reignite that same spark that led them into being friends in the first place. And as a result, they figured it would be best to take slow steps at first to rekindle that same spark. This seemed to be his attempt at it. Which one? Izuku asked. Bakugo rolled his eyes. How many video games could you have? The one you're always talking about in class. Izuku paused to think for a brief moment. Again, which one? He repeated. Bakugo let out a frustrated sigh as his fists clenched, sparks popping between his fingers. The one you're always playing on that damn computer of yours. What else? Izuku gestured wildly, flailing his arms in pure confusion. Which one? At that point Bakugo groaned furiously as Izuku struggled to hold in his snickers. Shut up, Deku, he snapped. Just pick a game we can play together, idiot. Izuku rubbed the back of his head as he lost himself in thought. Well, I have a lot of games, Kaken, but I suppose one we could start with is Overwatch. Bakugo wrinkled his nose. That one? Ugh, it looks so effing cheesy. Half the characters are made from nothing but sunshine and rainbows and the other half are effing emo. Got anything else? Izuku snorted. Fine, you do have a point there. Apex. Bakugo shrugged. I guess that one's fine, but I dunno about working in a team or anything like that. Come on, give me something violent. Izuku thought for a moment. They could try the Halo series or Doomguy, where he knew Bakugo would love the amount of gore and variety of ways to destroy your enemies. But the problem there was that neither game supported online play, which is what Izuku wanted Bakugo to experience first. It would help Bakugo get some more friends, true friends instead of the lackeys he usually had. Valorant? Nah. With how competitive and toxic the players can be, it would only serve to worsen the blonde's explosive personality. It would only make him more prone to looking down on everyone, including his teammates. Izuku needed a game where teamwork was necessary to win, but not an absolute priority. League of Legends and its sequel? Izuku disregarded the game immediately. While the game did promote teamwork, the grinding process to unlock future champions was infamous for being incredibly lengthy and aggravating. And the less said about its community the better. Trying a new game entirely was out of the question. It would be hard enough to guide Kaken on a game that he himself still required the time to learn. It would either be an annoying experience best case scenario, or only serve to widen the already massive rift between them at worst. So that left one option, a much older game that was still considered to rank highly, even among its modern successors. How about Team Fortress 2? Bakugo wrinkled his nose. The heck is that? You've never heard of it? Course I haven't. What's it even about? Izuku tapped his chin in thought. Well, the lore of the original game has been lost to time, and all the current devs did in terms of updates was an anti-cheat. Still better than the past devs, but I digress. So you can think of it as 9 mercenaries just blowing each other up with a side objective in mind. Izuku summarized. There are 2 teams, but most of the time you'll be playing on your own. That's it. Izuku nodded. Sounds simple. Bakugo grumbled. That's just part of its charm. Izuku agreed. There are tons of other benefits too, such as, Izuku took a deep breath to organize his thoughts before speaking. Well, for starters, it has a low skill floor and high skill ceiling, meaning that it's welcoming for new and old players alike. The characters all have different playstyles with their own unique game mechanics to master. This includes such things as rocket jumping for soldier, trick stabbing for spy, air blasting for pyro, etc., etc. On top of all that, you can further customize your playstyle with the different unlockable weapons that in the game. While some only provide a minor change in your gameplay, some unlockable weapons will radically change the class you're playing and force you to adapt. Some weapons are so unique that equipping them practically forms a subclass of its own, such Demo Knight. Furthermore, there are at least a dozen modes with at least 90 maps in total, with every update adding more and more. And that's not even touching on the cosmetics, which all have super cool designs, some even being designed by the community itself. And another thing, there's also, but by then Bakugo was frozen, utterly speechless as he watched his old friend go on one of his tangents like there was no tomorrow. While Bakugo didn't miss much about Midoriya to begin with, he was never fond of his muttering. Quickly overcoming his shock and growing more irritated by the second, he snapped his fingers under Midoriya's nose. The green-haired teen blinked rapidly as he refocused. Oi, quit the muttering. You always pulled this shit when we were younger. And if I'm gonna be sorry for Auntie, I can't beat your skull in like I usually do to stop it. Oh, right. Sorry about that. Izuku apologized, rubbing the back of his head with a flustered smile. If you can come over to my house over the weekend, I can show you a little bit on the gameplay and how to download it on your own computer. Sighing as Izuku watched Bakugo stiffen for only the slightest moment, he added, My mom's gonna be working a lot of the night shifts at the hospital for the weekend. There was a recent villain attack near the area, so her boss is asking for all hands on deck. You don't have to worry about meeting her. Don't assume shit, Deku. Bakugo muttered under his breath, but Izuku noticed his shoulders untense before he responded. Yeah, I can come. Have to ask my mom for permission, but once she hears that you're inviting me, then it shouldn't be too hard to convince her. Izuku smiled. Great, so I'm assuming you like how the game sounds then. Bakugo shrugged. Ignoring your damn rant, it sounds okay. Sounds better than the other pieces of shit you enjoy at the very least. Bakugo. Izuku chided. What? Bakugo hissed. Everything you talk about sounds so effing peaky it makes me want to hurl. Let's just hope that this game is different. Oh, don't worry, Izuku assured him. If you want something different, Team Fortress is your go-to. It's always the game I play when I want to let loose some steam. Bakugo choked, barely holding back his bark of laughter. Steam? What steam? Bakugo asked, snickering. What could you, Izuku effing Midoriya, Aka, the kid who eats sunshine for breakfast and rainbows for lunch, have to be angry about? To Bakugo's confusion, Izuku only sighed. Oh, I don't know, a few things I guess. Loading cutscene. Oh my god, aren't you a greedy effing bastard, you lime-faced piece of shit. Izuku seethed at the lime-green scout who stole his medkit, causing him to die to a stray sticky. The two were in Bakugo's house, with Izuku having brought his laptop to introduce him to the game. Like Jesus Christ, how in the ever-living F can you have two ends as a scout and yet snort up more heals than our entire effing team? Tell me, you effer. Izuku had initially suggested that they go through the tutorial when Bakugo simply said to skip in favor of jumping right in and explaining the game as they go. It was supposed to be a casual match where Izuku simply showed him the controls. However, several deaths caused by random crits and his own incompetent teammates quickly changed that. Bakugo watched in amazement as the same Izuku effing Midoriya, the same kid who would cry over crushed worms and paper cuts, started cussing out his own teammates harder than a drunken sailor. Granted, he was only really seething to himself since his mic was unplugged the entire time. By Izuku, calm down. I will not. Izuku immediately faltered as he whipped his head around to a wide-eyed Bakugo. Sorry, Kaken, he grumbled. No, don't apologize. Bakugo reassured him, much to Izuku's confusion. I never thought I'd see the day I see you actually grow a pair. What the hell happened to you while I was gone? Izuku blinked at the maniacal grin Bakugo sported. I mean, not everything about games is always so happy, you know. Yeah, I won my first couple of games since matchmaking was just being nice, but once I got a little better, the enemies did too. So there were a bunch of times where I just got an incompetent team and I'd have to deal with it since I just don't have it in me to actually start yelling at my teammate. So you go here to basically vent that shit out? Bakugo asked. Izuku shrugged. Pretty much. Most of TF2 is pretty casual, with everyone kinda just looking out for themselves instead of being forced to work in a team. I can silently vent my anger about my teammates' incompetence without really affecting the game. It's a win-win. Bakugo nodded in approval. That actually doesn't sound half bad. The game's graphics look shitty, but in a good violent sorta way, you know. Sounds like my kind of shit. Giggling, Izuku turned to his friend with a bright smile. See, I knew you'd like it. Almost immediately after Izuku made the comment, Bakugo scowled once more. Don't get used to it. You and your shitty opinions can stay far away from me, you damn nerd. Izuku shrugged. So long as I have this, I'll be content. Now do you want me to show you how to install it on your own computer or what? Alright class, the teacher droned, holding a thick stack of papers in his hands. With the end of your third year approaching, it's about time you start to consider what you want to do for the rest of your lives. The class eagerly nodded, several heads spastically shaking up and down. Meanwhile, both Bakugo and Izuku remained uninterested, the former scoffing at the rambunctious lot while the latter jotted notes at Mach 3. Oh, who am I kidding? The teacher suddenly threw all of the papers up in the air with a wide grin. You all just want to be heroes, don't you? The children cheered as they all demonstrated their own quirks and their enthusiasm. everything ranging from stretched eyeballs to extended fingernails to flying spikes of hair. To ch. Bakugo then stood up from his seat, standing with one foot on his chair and the other on his desk. Don't throw me in with the rest of them, teach. The only ones becoming heroes are gonna be me and Izuku, 8. Don't you forget it. Izuku rolled his eyes at the outrage that followed Bakugo's claim. 2 years had passed, and the boys' relationship was completely renewed. Their families saw each other practically every other week, and they had forged a bond arguably stronger than the one before Izuku's misdiagnosis. They were practically inseparable, sticking by each other at every opportunity, including walking home with each other as well. And during after-school hours, they would then hop on their computers to play TF2 for hours on end. Bakugo would continue to learn the ropes and improve while Izuku furthered his skills as well. Countless calls on Bonfire let them even join a couple of servers and make several new online friends. As time progressed, they moved on to different games as well. The two branched out to not only expand Izuku's arsenal of characters but to just have fun playing together. Once they were of age, the two of them signed up for a Quirk gym and bought their memberships to prepare for UA. Bakugo learned to control his explosions while Izuku trained to utilize his wide variety of characters, the two brainstorming up super moves and how to mesh their quirks with potential fighting styles. Had Izuku not experienced all of this himself, he would have sworn this was an alternate universe altogether. One where Bakugo was able to be mellowed out by him and in return Bakugo giving him back his self-confidence. That being said, Izuku constantly having to rein a temperamental Bakugo will always remain unchanged. Several glares and scowls were aimed at Bakugo and his challenge. What the hell, Bakugo? Yeah, don't count us out just yet. Who are you to call everyone useless? Deku got his quirk when he was 7. He's 3 years behind us. At that last one, Bakugo whipped his head around to glare at the perpetrator dead in the eyes. Huh, you wanna repeat that to me, punk? He took a step forward to glare at the student that challenged him. First, where do you think you get off calling him Deku? That's my thing and only when I'm pissed. Second, Izuku is ahead of all of you losers. The fact that he got his quirk late and he's still standing next to me just proves how worthless you all are. He'd be nothing but dead weight if you were a hero. Izuku sighed as he decided it was time for him to step in. Kakin, he chided, flashing a reassuring smile as he placed a hand on his shoulder. You can't keep calling everyone deadweights just because they want the same endgame as you. Anyone can become a hero if they're willing to put enough effort into it. One of the other kids with a forked tongue scoffed, his tongue flicking through the air with disdain. You're just saying that because you have a quirk that lets you breeze through the entire thing. You and Bakugo. Bakugo turned to verbally wail on the student when Izuku spoke up first, shaking his head as he held the same smile. But Ryoshi-kun, that doesn't mean you can't try. Just because me and Bakugo had strong quirks doesn't mean that you should give up. You just have to grind a little harder than we do. Besides, your quirk is pretty strong too. I can think of 3 different applications for Komodo Shift and Hero Work off the top of my head. And I bet that when we go to UA, there's bound to be a lot of other people with quirks as powerful as ours. Bakugo smirked at Izuku. We're still gonna smoke the leaderboards though, right? Can't imagine someone putting in the hours we did. At that very moment, a strange phenomenon occurred. 3 students from prestigious households simultaneously sneezed, 35 others scrunching up their noses in an effort to avoid doing so. Why do I have the sudden urge to throat punch someone? They all simultaneously thought. The students briefly marveled at the fact they were going to UA as their teacher nodded sagely. That's true, the job is hard, and there's no denying it's dangerous. But as long as your quirk is strong, then heroics will always be an option for you. Just don't bother if you have a weaker quirk though, or God forbid, are quirkless. Izuku bit his lip tersely, struggling to maintain the smile. The tick was only noticed by Bakugo, who winced. Had it been someone else, Izuku and Bakugo both would have worked together to refute the argument, but starting something with their teacher even as the top students wouldn't go over well with the principal. That being said, Izuku did manage to add, yes, as long as you understand the risk and the RNG involved when it comes to getting popular, I don't see why you can't go into heroics. Yeah, and don't you forget it, Kakin. One student stupidly blurted out. Hey, Bakugo's hand sparked as he whipped his head around, searching for the offender. You have a death wish, motherfucker. But before Bakugo could chase down whoever it was that spoke, the bell rang and the students quickly filtered out through the door, the only ones left in class being Bakugo and Izuku. Bakugo clicked his tongue, tapping his feet impatiently as he waited for Izuku to finish up writing in his notebook. Hurry up, Deku, he snarled. We don't got all day. Right, I'm coming. Don't get your tie in a knot. He hastily jotted down the last of his notes and stuffed it in his bag. That fight between Majestic and that shark villain was just really riveting, you know. Magic versus brute force and everything. Had me on the edge of my seat the entire time. Bakugo only snorted. To you, maybe. You geek out about shit like that almost as much as your damn video games. Izuku playfully rolled his eyes one more time, smirking as he said, "Don't pretend you don't do the same. I still remember the time you spent at near 5 hours debating why Overwatch was inferior to TF2. Bakugo could only sputter. That's because it is. Everything bout Overwatch is just shit taken from TF2 except with more crowd control and actually having to give a shit about your team." Izuku snorted. Right, because having to give shit about others when we plan to go into a career about saving people is very stupid. Thanks for your invaluable input, Kaken. Izuku laughed as he received a glare and a quick F off from his friend, walking through the open door. Loading cutscene. Right, so I'm playing Raze and scores about 7-9. Whatever. I'm facing off against this Reina in a 1vs1, and I didn't know where she was. I just knew she was somewhere on point. Yeah, Bakugo snickered. I walk around and check, and then out of nowhere our Omen calls out. I can hear him on heaven. Get his ass. And what did you do? Bakugo asked, practically cackling at this point. I just blind jumped on him with the satchel and knifed him in the face. Izuku howled, clapping his hands together. They both practically bowled over, wheezing with laughter. Their cheeks were red as they struggled to breathe, bystanders doing their best to walk around the duo. Eventually Izuku was able to form coherent sentences, wiping a tear with the sleeve of his uniform. Once the round was over and my teammates stopped screaming in voice, that Reina targeted me for the rest of the game. Mother Fur literally went out of his way to teabag my corpse anytime he could. What? So he just didn't have the nerve to even face you? Izuku nodded, causing Bakugo to scowl. What a beach. If you want to get your own back, running like some damn pussy is only proving them right. I know, right? I guess that's why it felt a little extra annoying when we lost on a tiebreaker. They both continued walking as silence took over the conversation. Bakugo, not one to back down from a challenge, spoke first. Hey nerd, you know you don't have to hide anything from me, right? Izuku did his best to look confused. What do you mean? What the teacher said. He clarified. I know the whole lot of the staff are a-holes, and trust me when I say whatever bullshit they're spouting gets on my nerves too. Izuku sighed, exasperated. Yeah, but what are you supposed to do? Doesn't matter how much they suck, they're still our teachers. Going out of my way just to debate with them isn't going to do anything but waste their time and risk detention. Bakugo grunted. They don't give out detentions to us though. They never have. As much as I hate to admit it, those Quirkus cocksuckers are either scared of us or don't want to stain our reputation. That's not the point, Kaken. Izuku stopped, pausing at the bridge they were walking under. What I mean is that arguing with them like that isn't going to change anything. It isn't going to change their minds, and it's definitely not going to change the principles. Have you tried bringing it up to the school board about it? Bakugo asked. Izuku thought about it before shaking his head. No, but I don't think that would do anything either. I would need at least some recorded evidence, and I don't think that anything verbal would count either. Verbal harassment is a thing. Bakugo countered. Izuku snorted. Insults and death threats are verbal harassment. Making an off comment about your opinions that's not even aimed at someone is not. Even then, stuff like that gets overlooked all the time. You have no idea how many a-holes on the internet just say kais and treat it like a joke. Bakugo rolls his eyes. Gods, I know. It's like a effing gut reaction for those damn bastards. Threatening to end someone is one thing, but even I draw the line at suicide baiting. Izuku smiled. I know. You're too nice for that. Huh? Bakugo turned to glare at Izuku. The F you say to me, Deku. Izuku giggled. What? Can Lord Explosion Murder have to be constantly grumpy as well as angry? Bakugo cursed. Motherfu, I was 10 when I created that name. F off. No. Izuku hummed out happily, skipping forward. What the stop trying to avoid the conversation, you damn coward. Bakugo groaned. Every time I bring this up you always switch the topic and prance away like a effing pony. Izuku sighed, getting the slightest bit irritated. What's more is there to say, Kaken? I can't change anything about it and there's no point trying to. It's like trying to convince Installacher to switch to support, you know. You're hopeless to get them to get off when you can just play support yourself anyways. But 10 months, Kaken, Izuku stated. We have 10 months at Aldera before we get our 3 years at UA. We've already been waiting 14 years for our dream school. What's 10 more months? Izuku smiled to placate Bakugo's disgruntled expression. Aw, don't make such a big deal of it, Kaken. Everyone knows I have a quirk now. Who cares if I'm a late bloomer? As Izuku walked off thinking the conversation was over, Bakugo huffed as he reluctantly reached for his final resort. You do, Izuku? He snarled at Izuku's shocked expression. Don't lie to me, Deku. Every time someone mentions anything about the quirkless or strong quirks being needed for heroics, you always flinch like they insulted Auntie or some shit. And what's wrong about that? Izuku questioned, smile gone as he ducked down his head to avoid his gaze. What's wrong if I'm just tired of quirkist comments? Even if they don't mean it, or even if they're not directed at me, you can't just expect me to not react. That's not what I'm saying, damn nerd. Bakugo placed a hand on his shoulder. I'm saying you shouldn't have to deal with it on your own. You think that I'm okay with their bullshit? Every time I hear something like that, it just reminds me of the D I once was. Izuku winced. That's different and you know it. How so? Izuku sighed. You were only 7. We're talking about grown-ass adults here. That's basically like comparing a newbie who griefs to someone who does it for a living. You and the other kids did it because you all didn't know any better. They do and still choose to do it. Bakugo was about to reply when a deep rumbling sound came from a manhole behind them. What was Izuku got abruptly cut off as black sludge exploded from the manhole covering. 2 high-level skin suits. Perfect. 2 eyeballs rolling around in the sludge gleamed with greed as the villain quickly approached them, several strings of slime outstretched to grab the boys. I just need to borrow your bodies real quick to save my hide for a moment. You wouldn't mind that, would you? The 2 were quick to react. Bakugo blasted himself backwards with his explosions, grabbing Izuku by the back of his uniform collar to pull him back as well. Like hell, you slimy bastard. Izuku, turn into jet and lift me up, just like we practiced. Bakugo roared. Izuku nodded to him, green pixel particles briefly washing over his body. When the particles were gone, it left him wearing a light blue sleeveless jacket paired with a matching crop top. His loose jeans were replaced with tight combat pants, and his usual red sneakers were exchanged for high-tech running shoes. Light pieces of armor with a tailwind emblem adorned his hoodie, along with fingerless gloves donning his hands and a belt of knives wrapped around his waist. Izuku grappled him by the waist before using updraft to lift them up. The villain was briefly confused before gazing up to the air in shock. What in the AP shot? Airstrike variation. Firing several explosions through a hole made with his thumb and index finger, Bakugo let loose a hail of tightly packed explosions to rain down in a carpet bombing. All of it was absorbed by the sludge before shrouding him in a cloud of smoke. The villain let out a cry of pain, but his body was obscured, preventing them from advancing. Bakugo let out a large explosion to clear the smoke, but the villain was already gone. Bakugo cursed. Izuku, keep us in the air. I'll propel us to the bridge, he said, letting loose some more controlled blasts to send them spiraling downwards to the overpass. Izuku outstretched his hand to break their fall, creating a cushion of air that let briefly hover before landing on their feet. Nodding in approval, Bakugo grinned at Izuku. Nice flying. First time we actually managed to land without a scratch. Izuku sheepishly rubbed the back of his head. Yeah. That latest buff to updraft's air control really helped. Leaning forward to look off the bridge, Bakugo sneered as he squinted at the smoke. Where's the coward? Can't have the nerve to ambush us and then dip out like a beach. Maybe he's going back to regenerate or something. That last move was pretty powerful, Izuku replied. Well, it's either that, or he's planning to ambush. Before Izuku could even finish the thought, the villain was suddenly behind them, having climbed up the side of the bridge while they were distracted. Shit, Bakugo shouted. He tried his best to blast back as he did before, but he was too slow this time. The slime had grabbed him by the arm and pulled him in. Kaken, Izuku cried. He threw his knife, aiming for the eye but missed as it sank harmlessly in the sludge. Let him go. MMH, I don't think so. See, your friend here has a very powerful quirk. Izuku tried to get the image of the villain licking his non-existent lips out of his head as he talked. With him, I'll be able to fight you off and whatever hero decides to challenge me. Izuku cursed as he desperately tried to think of a character that would help him but unable to do so. Bakugo was quickly reeled into the sludge, explosions going off from his palms but being absorbed just as quickly. His limbs were pulled away from his chest as the slime did its best to rip open his mouth and pour down his trachea. Izuku's eyes widened when he saw the look that Bakugo gave him that would remain engraved in his mind. That look of pure unadulterated fear that Bakugo had, pleading him for help that he just couldn't provide. Tears quickly formed in his eyes as he thought back to any potential games he played from last night, from last week. God, it was so hard to remember when all he can think about is Kaken. Kaken, the friend that he's been with for 2 years but feels like he only got back yesterday. Kaken, who was being suffocated right in front of him. He was half tempted to just run in and use whatever he could. But even now he knew that would only get him ended as well. The sludge villain cackled. Don't worry, I don't need him for long. Just enough time to escape the hero that's chasing me and cause a little chaos. That's all. Izuku froze as he processed what he said, a light bulb lighting up inside his brain. As quickly as he could, another wave of pixelated particles washed over him once more as his clothing began to shift again. His light blue jacket and hoodie was traded for an orange top, exposing his midriff with a backwards orange cap on his head. The sash carrying his kunai was gone, replaced by a belt carrying several volatile grenades stained with paint. Shouting, he yanked off a grenade from the belt and threw it, not at the villain but up the sky, before running backwards. The villain recoiled warily, but inwardly smiled once he saw the grenade blow up into nothing more than an impressive spray paint display and a few cluster bombs that was easily absorbed into his skin. Nice one, kid. The villain jeered. You missed a target that was not only in front of you, but at least 3 times your size. I have no idea what your quirk is, but you ought to improve your aim a bit if you want to play hero. That wasn't for you, dumbass. Izuku spat. If the villain could, he would have flinched from the venomous glare Izuku had locked onto him. It was a flare. Izuku held back a smile as he imagined the sludge villain's eyes widening. What? No, not him. Anyone but him. The villain tried his best to run, but with Bakugo resisting him simultaneously, he couldn't move. All of his efforts would either have to be spent trying to control Bakugo or running from whatever hero was bound to approach. You wanted an escape option, right? Here's a quick time event for you, F'er. Izuku snarled. You leave him and run, or you stand and fight. Your choice. Izuku snarled. The villain howled. Fine, you can take your damn friend. I'm out of here. The villain hastily left Bakugo in a desperate attempt to run. Bakugo was dispensed unceremoniously on the concrete, the blonde immediately turning over to vomit out large amounts of sludge. The smell was abhorrent, but Izuku couldn't care less. Kakin. Izuku shed his costume to turn back into his school uniform as he kneeled by Bakugo's side. The blonde scowled weakly as he gazed up into Izuku's wet eyes, still hacking up bits of sludge. You cough, damn nerd. I didn't need saving, especially cough from you. Just shut up. Izuku snapped, startling Bakugo. Just shut up already. You nearly died, you effing idiot. Do you have any idea how effing worried I was? Bakugo prepared a retort, but upon looking into Izuku's angry and tearful gaze, he swallowed it back and grumbled out, fine. Izuku ran a hand through his bushy green hair as he sobbed. The whole time I was so scared for you. I can't. Even that one villain nearly ended both of us and we're the top students of our school. That C-tier villain, maybe B-tier at best, og. Effing we want to go to UA and a effing farm mob nearly got us, Kakin. Izuku crouched down as he curled in on himself, sobbing as he repressed the urge to dry heave. And I was so damn useless. Hey, none of that. Bakugo sputtered, slowly getting to one knee before standing up, setting a firm hand on Izuku's shoulder. You don't get to save me, cough, and then beat yourself up about it, Zuku. You're implying I'm weaker than you that way. Sides, that villain countered my explosions and got the drop on us. Not to mention the fact we're still not in hero school yet. Izuku wet his lips, finding them a lot drier than he remembered. But I did a lot more than I could. Did your ass forget that you saved me? Or are you just that stupid? Pause of you. He at the very least thinks some hero is after him. He'll probably get arrested sooner rather than later. Yes, the both of you are quite right. Both of them jumped at the voice, whirling around only for their jaws to clatter to the floor. All might, Bakugo managed to squeak out. Had Izuku not been reacting even worse than Bakugo, he would have recorded just how high Bakugo's voice had gotten for future teasing material. Yes, it is I, and I am here to I'm sorry, but is your friend all right? He doesn't appear to be breathing. Bakugo then scowled as he turned to his friend, who had his mouth open and closing like a gaping fish. True to All Might's word, Izuku seemed to also forget that in order to survive, one must intake oxygen through the nose or mouth. It's possible that he lost sight of this goal when his soul subconsciously declared that his life had peaked, and he had nothing else to live for now that he met his idol. Bakugo scowled, cuffing his friend on the back of the neck. Oi, Izuku, blink mother fur. Izuku suddenly gasped, his face pale as he started blubbering wildly. His eyes never left All Might with his hands continuously shaking. Out with it, nerd. All Might, he practically screeched. All Might forced his smile this time, embarrassingly chuckling as he was brought back to the days when he was a fanboy. He still remembered his first interaction with Nana after all. Why yes, I saw your signal and came to assist. I'm assuming you were fighting this villain here. All Might held up a soda bottle filled to the brim with black sludge, 2 pairs of eyeballs rolling around in the plastic. He was quite the nuisance actually. I've been searching for him for quite some time when I saw him tackling a pair of the elderly. But then he made his way into the sewers where I lost him. I resurfaced a few moments ago in my hopes to see him perhaps terrorizing others. When I saw your quirk in action, my boy. Excellent way to get my attention. Oh, me. Izuku stuttered, instantly rubbing the back of his head. Oh, that was nothing. I was just trying to help out my friend here and Izuku froze as he realized something. On my notebook. I have to get your autograph. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Do you perhaps mean this notebook, my boy? All Might held up a small paperback with the words, Hero Analysis Vol 13 inscribed on the cover. I found it under the bridge and presumed it belonged to one of you. Izuku snatched the notebook instantly, furiously flipping away at pages to get to All Might's. Thank you so much. Could you? All Might let out another boisterous laugh before Izuku could ask. No need, I already signed the first page. Izuku gasped as he realized this was the case, seeing both his signature and name in bright blue marker. Thank you, All Might, he cried, his Midoriya genes plaguing once more as tears poured from his eyes. This will be a treasured heirloom, a family treasure that will be cherished for years to come. Izuku, shut it. You're gonna embarrass the both of us, got him it? Bakugo snarled. All Might let out an internal sigh, grateful that at least the blonde one knew how to rein in his friend. There was a good reason why he doesn't go to see fans often. His first debut was already bad enough, but now, while it would certainly be unethical to Manchester smash a bunch of news reporters or die-hard fans, it would be the only way for him to do a meet and greet and come out with all 4 of his limbs. That relief was quickly smoldered to ash by Bakugo, however, when he took off his shoe and handed it to All Might with a serious dead-ass look on his face. I don't have a piece of paper like Zuko does, so can you sign my shoe instead? For the first time in a long time, All Might's smile wavered. Perhaps another time, eh? After all, you boys look like you could be potential US students, is that right? This is what snaps Izuku out of his stupor. Yes. Yes, we are. We plan on trying out for all the best hero schools we can. Maybe you will, you damn nerd. Bakugo scoffed. I'm applying for UA. I'm getting accepted for UA. End of story. All Might shrugged. While it is always good to be confident, applying for multiple hero schools to increase your chances never hurts. Even the strongest quirks won't do diddly squat without proper effort put behind it. That being said, you two look like you have the most potential out of everyone I've seen. If you plan to apply there, I expect to see you both in the entrance exam. Oh, thank you, All Might. We really wait a minute. Izuku gained a confused look. You'll be at the entrance exam. All Might realized his verbal blunder the second Izuku pointed it out. He did his best to actively repress the beads of sweat dripping down his forehead that would inevitably give him away. Well, you see, I just meant. Bakugo's eyes widened. You're gonna be administering the entrance exam with the other teachers, or scouting out an examinee at the very least. Izuku's eyes widened in turn. And if you said you were going to sign Kaken's shoes later, that implies you're gonna see us in person and not just watching us from a screen. Which means, they both lit up at the conclusion, the two boys exclaiming at the same time with stars shining bright in their eyes. You're gonna be teaching at UA. If All Might wasn't preoccupied with trying not to hack up his remaining lung from surprise, he might have praised the pair's deduction skills. He opened his mouth to try and at the very least discredit the theory, before seeing there was no point. Well, would you look at the time? It seems to me that you two young boys are both recovering well and can make it to home on your own. Goodbye. And then he took off, practically confirming the boys' claims. Loading cutscene. Man, I can't believe All Might is going to be teaching at UA. Imagine being coached by the #1 hero, Kaken. You bet your ass that I'm excited, nerd. Bakugo cackled, stuffing his hand back in the bag to rest out another fistful of chips. If I want to be the best, I gotta learn from the best after all. Izuku smiled fondly at the blonde, legs dangling off the bed as Bakugo was laid down on his futon. The two were together in a sleepover for the weekend. After a couple of hours playing Halo on Izuku's PlayStation 350, a hasty dinner, and a secret gaming session with their own 5DS, the two were chatting excitedly. Just think about the other heroes who could coach us, Kaken. We already know Present Mike teaches English, but who do you think our homeroom teacher is going to be? Who gives a shit? If All Might is teaching us for heroics, who else could we need? Izuku giggled. Well, I don't think the public would be very fond of heroes who don't understand basic addition. Bakugo swore under his breath for the second time that day, scowling at his friend who was openly laughing at this point. You still remember that, you motherfucker? You know you tricked me by playing the video of that damn meme beforehand. It doesn't count. Silence. Izuku barely managed to wheeze out. What's 9 plus 10, Kaken? Bakugo leveled a deep glare at Izuku, perhaps hoping to reduce his friends into ashes from sheer intensity before he had a chance to finish. Don't you dare, he mouthed. Approximately 5 seconds passed before Izuku whispered, 21. Silence. Bakugo's rage turned dead cold as he set his jaw. Prepare an unmarked grave. I'm coming up there, motherfucker. Wait, no. I take it, bah. Izuku giggled as he did his best to shove off the encroaching blonde invading his bed. His attempts were futile as Bakugo's hands found themselves at his sides and quickly ravaged them with tickles. No, he isn't. Stop. And no. Please, Og. Izuku pleaded desperately as he squirmed in place, laughs soon replacing any semblance of speech he could form. Bakugo smirked. What are you gonna do now, Deku? Are you gonna? But Bakugo froze when he caught sight of Izuku's pale expression of fear, staring ahead into empty space with his lips quivering. Almost immediately after, Bakugo got off his friend and sat back cross-legged on his futon. He mumbled out an apology as he kept his head looking down. Izuku realized what happened with horror. Oh my god, no, Kaken. You know that I didn't. You know that wasn't. No, don't say sorry or any bullshit like that. Bakugo grumbled out. I was a D to you before. I deserve to remember it every once in a while. Izuku sighed, struggling to find the proper phrasing. Finally, he settled on a half-blunt, half-sympathetic approach. Listen, I won't say that what you did was okay, but we were just kids. If you want someone to blame, look at the teachers that allowed that shit to happen in the first place. Bakugo shrugged. I guess. But that doesn't change the fact that people used to treat you like shit just for something out of your control. Like, I'm looking back on it and I'm not only seeing just how much of a jerk I was, but just how stupid the entire situation is. How everyone can be such dumbasses and still believe they're in the right. It's complete horseshit. Izuku hesitated at this. Okay, now that I won't disagree with. Quirkism is stupid at its core, and it would take a lot to get rid of something everyone is just so used to. If I'm being honest though, my quirklessness isn't used to bother me. This got an eyebrow raise from Bakugo, prompting Izuku to quickly explain. I mean, the fact of it. The fact I didn't have a quirk isn't what annoyed me. It's just the label that came with it, you know. You tell people you're quirkless and suddenly everyone is either pushing you down or treating you like glass because they don't think you're capable of doing literally anything. Bakugo was silent as Izuku continued. But now people treat me completely differently now that I actually have a quirk, even though it didn't actually change anything about my day-to-day life. That's like if I use sniper to headshot someone and they accuse me of hacking. But if I end them in one shot by air blasting a crit rocket, then it's completely fine. Like what the F? Hey, nerd. S okay. I know how you feel. Me and Auntie both do. No, you don't, Kakin. That's the thing. Bakugo flinched back at this when Izuku turned to him with a glare. You don't get that feeling since you're always so powerful and invincible and you always win. Every time we spar I get crushed. Every time in Fi's head I always come second in whatever we do. And even when I was supposed to save you, I just froze up because I couldn't think. It just all makes me feel like I never had a quirk in the first place. Okay, now I must stop you right there, Deku, cause that is complete horseshit. It was Izuku's turn to lean back at Bakugo's twisted snarl. You think I don't feel scared? I don't feel afraid. None of that shit. If you want to talk about who should be afraid of the other getting better at everything, I'm the one who should be worried about that shit. Every time we get a test back, you get a higher mark. Every time we're coming up with support gear or new super moves, guess who has the best ideas? Izuku bit his lip. Kakin, that's different. And when I was trapped in that sludge villain, don't even start with just how effing scared shitless I was, Deku. Maybe 2 seconds later I would have gone unconscious. I had 30 seconds at most before I went under. If you didn't send that signal to All Might when you did, we were both dead meat, alright. You don't get to call yourself useless because then what does that make me? Tell me. A brief moment of contemplation occurred as the two friends stared at each other. Finally, Izuku exhaled with a shaky breath as he took in his friend's words with widened eyes. He smiled at his friend with tears already forming in his eyes. You're amazing, Kakin. You always will be. And by that logic that means so will you, you damn nerd. Bakugo concluded smugly. Now come on. Just because we don't have school tomorrow doesn't mean we can't start slacking on training. You got that? Yeah. Izuku nodded eagerly as the duo went to bed, falling asleep shortly after. Well, nerd, this is it. You ready? Bakugo asked, a smirk already present on his face. 10 months. 10 months of grueling physical and quirk training lead up to this moment. From long study sessions, buying constant gym memberships and various video games, to exploding targets nonstop, they had prepared for every possible outcome in both the written and practical. That's why it wasn't a surprise when the usually anxiety-ridden Izuku chirped in response, born ready and you know it. After having finished gazing in awe at the giant gates, the two made their way through the campus. Izuku could barely hold himself back from geeking out over every little detail of the building as they walked down the paved steps. His heart pounded in his chest. His mind buzzed. Students around them walked around them with equal awe or glee upon their faces. This was it. This was going to be the first step they had to take to start their hero careers. Joining the ultimate parameter for all hero schools in the world would nearly solidify their futures in stone, so long as they avoided expulsion, of course. Which is why they needed to be careful. They needed to be vigilant. They needed to be. Izuku tripped, his foot catching the bulging edge of a stone in the path. Zuku. Bakugo's eyes widened as his friend keeled over, stuck in freefall when another girl quickly dashed forward. Instead of grabbing his collar, however, she simply placed 5 fingers on his jacket instead. Izuku, who had his eyes closed at the time, was wondering why his face hadn't met the floor yet. He slowly opened his eyes, only to realize he started floating. Whoa. He started flailing around in the air in a panic, kicking his legs around with his hands straddling his backpack straps. Oh, sorry. A brunette with a bob cut appeared, rosy cheeks that bordered on chubby. She had a hand scratching the back of her head, with a light blush gently blooming across her face. I didn't think to ask if I could use my quirk on you. My bad. Are you okay? Izuku turned his head around with eyes as big as quarters. I thank you. Izuku swallowed as he hovered midair, feeling too flustered and awkward to come up with a proper response. Uraraka noticed. Oh, right. You're still floating in the air. Let me fix that real quick. Release. Touching the tips of her fingers together, Izuku promptly fell to the ground, his chest landing squarely on the concrete. Bakugo smirked as he stared at his fallen friend. You alright there, Zuku? I mean, I know you used to be pretty clumsy, but to trip on a flat stone path is a new level of embarrassing. The girl tilted her head. Zuku. Oh, Zizuku is just what he calls me. Izuku blurted. So you have a Z0 gravity quirk. That's really cool. Are you planning on going into the hero course? You bet. She smiled, the intensity of it rivaling even Izuku's in terms of brightness. I'd ask you guys for introductions, but if you're trying out for the hero course, we'll probably see each other often anyways. Bakugo nodded. You bet your ass we are. Take a good look because you're looking at the next top 2 heroes in the industry. Izuku finally managed to sputter out. Kakin, you can't just we're not you have to. He stopped, however, when he saw Uraraka laughing, stifling short giggles with closed eyes and a palm pressed to her mouth. Sorry. It's just you have a really funny friendship dynamic, you know. One's super angry and competitive and the other's quieter and more nervous. It's really cute. Izuku warbled. But before both of them could properly respond, she bent over to extend her hand to Izuku, another million-watt smile that could have rivaled his in intensity. If you're going into the hero course, then I can only hope that I see you in the classroom with me as well. See you soon. Izuku shakily took her hand to pull himself off, watching her as she walked away into the building. Bakugo, seeing the potential teasing material, smirked. Yo, Zuku, you wanna be late or what? Come on, you're gonna have plenty of time to see your girlfriend later when you pass. This is what snapped Izuku out of his stupor. His eyes went from as wide as dimes to large as quarters, bulging out of their sockets as if they were grapes now. WHBUKACCHIN. He practically screeched, not helped by Bakugo only cackling at his response and other sweat dropping at the scene. Loading cutscene. Alright everybody, pencils down. The exam is over, President Mike yelled, causing several students to jump out of their seats as he gestured to the exit. All hero examinees, make your way to the auditorium for the practical. I'll tell you all what to do from there. YDAH. Izuku gently placed his palms over his ears, cringing as he walked through the doors. He quickly met up with Bakugo and asked his friend what he thought of the test. Bakugo only scoffed. That shit was easy. Only thing that was dumb about it was the stupid amount of effing writing I had to do for the last section. How about you? Izuku shrugged. Same here I guess. Though we had President Mike as the proctor and he was pretty loud. Nothing like eardrum breaking though, so it was all good. Bakugo winced. Yeesh, yeah, I wouldn't be able to effing deal with that shit if I was with you. My quirk already makes my hearing shit enough. I don't need him effing it up even more. Thankfully ectoplasm's pretty quiet. Hands you the sheet before effing off for about 2 hours or so. The conversation continues for a few minutes as they discuss test answers till they make their way to the large metal doors. Walking in, they briefly surveyed the large chamber with its packed audience before finding and taking their seats. A few minutes later, the lights go off. The entire theater-like room went dark. Beams of light shone from above to point at the stage, where a round DJ's stand was placed. GOOD morning UA. President Mike howled, striking a finger upwards as he called out to the audience. Can I get a hee? Silence. Somewhere towards the back a brief cough could be heard. President Mike huffed. Anyone at the front and listening close could hear him mutter. One of these days I'll get one to respond. One of these days. He cleared his throat before continuing. Welcome, examinees, to the practical portion of the UA entrance exam. It's regarded as the test, the ultimate trial, the deciding factor for your careers as future hero students at UA High. Izuku was vibrating in his seat, barely managing to keep his muttering to a hush thanks to Bakugo's stern glare. People were still wary enough to slightly lean away from him though, believing to either have an hyperactive quirk or taken one too many coffees. President Mike continues on by explaining the premises of the exam along with its point system. So what is UA's so very elusive practical exam? Well, prepare your quirks and steel your wits because this year it's a robot beatdown. Each of you will be brought to a battlefield to destroy as many of those tin cans as possible for points. On each one of your desks should be a pamphlet detailing each robot and how many points it's worth. More points you get, the better you do in the exam. Simple as that. Any questions? As Izuku remarked about how it was essentially the same as a retro-style video game, another person spoke up. Excuse me, I believe I do. A navy blue-haired student from a couple of seats behind Izuku calls out, his back ramrod straight and arms still as sticks by his sides. Yes, examinee 7173. What is your question, little listener? I have some concerns about the fourth robot addressed in this pamphlet when on screen it shows 3. I sincerely hope that this potential mistake could be clarified, for even as a typo it is rather shameful for a school as studious and prestigious as UA. While Bakugo grumbled out, damn elite. Present Mike answered his question. Oh yes, that fourth robot you have on that sheet is not worth any points whatsoever. Think of it as a large-scale threat you have to avoid instead. Nothing stopping you from trying to take it on. But if it's not worth anything, what's the point? The boy bowed down at a near 90-degree angle, apologizing profusely before sitting back down. Alright LIL listeners, one last thing I should mention is that in the case you're injured during the exam and can't continue, find one of our medical robots to help guide you to the infirmary. Even though we tell people to go plus ultra, we also encourage people to stay safe when they can. No need to get yourself ended over an entrance exam. Present Mike gestured to a picture of a hovering bot colored red and white with UAS logo stamped on the top of it. Now head down out those doors and go to midnight for your battle center and appropriate bus. Good luck to you all, and remember, plus ultra. At this the student body actually did respond, chanting out the school's motto with brief enthusiasm before heading out of their seats into the doors. Soon enough, Izuku and Bakugo got their letters, the former getting F and the latter complaining about his C. Such bullshit, Bakugo grumbled out. Those motherfuckers really went out of their way to separate us, huh? Well, they probably did that to prevent teaming, which in all fairness we would given the chance. Izuku hummed. Besides, I thought you hate teamers? Bakugo snorted. Teaming up in a battle royal is cowardly. In a PvE scenario, it just sounds like a good strategy in my eyes. So long as you aren't pussyfooting around and putting in your fair share. If you already know them though, it's not a strategy at that point then. That's just common sense. Izuku countered. If they want us to team, they'll probably want us to do it with strangers. And the chances of that happening are fairly low since they don't give us enough prep time to talk and everyone's looking to nab the highest score for themselves. The two probably would have continued the conversation had they not reached their respective buses. Quickly waving goodbye, they boarded their buses to head out to their respective centers. Loading cutscene. So I could use Scout since he has a lot of speed, but I'd run out of ammo fairly quickly. Octane. No, he has to search for his guns. I know a few League characters that would be pretty good, but I don't think I have enough playtime to properly use those. You there? Izuku whipped his head around to find the same navy-haired boy from earlier marching towards him rapidly. Me, Izuku stuttered out in his confusion. Yes, you with the green unkempt mop of hair. The boy had stopped in front of him. He was noticeably taller, giving him the ability to glower down at Izuku from above. Stop your obscenely loud muttering. You're distracting all of the others. Either take this exam seriously like the rest of us or leave now. Izuku blinked several times at his gesticulations, arm chopping up and down in the air as if he was a Navy SEAL commander or a veteran sushi chef. And no, I wasn't. That was just me strategizing. Were you sent here to distract us? Perhaps a ploy by UAS administrators? Eyes widened now. Izuku waved his own hands as groups around them began to lightly snicker. Of course not. I was just planning which character I need to. Ready, set, go. Present Mike's voice suddenly blared over the announcements. Every single examinee stood still in place, still in the process of figuring out what they just heard. The tall teen was stuck mid-arm chop as he too was frozen in the spot. After about 2 long and awkward seconds, Present Mike added, well, come on. There's no countdowns in real life. Go, go, go. Izuku cursed as other examinees were standing still in confusion. Shit, I guess we'll have to continue this conversation never. Bye. Quickly deciding on a character, he turned sharply on his heel to sprint into the city. Green pixels were already washing over his body as the rest of the students were left gobsmacked. The contestants rushed forward after him, filing themselves into the streets as they chased after Izuku for his lead. Izuku failed to hold back the smirk behind his metal mask as he saw his first group of targets, green visor gleaming as he quickly approached a group of 0-pointers. Their bulky fists banged and clanged, huffing out steam as they rushed Izuku as a metal mass. Arm already reaching for the sword strapped to his waist, he tightly gripped onto the handle with thumb on the hilt. Instincts kicked in as he eyed the optimal path to hit the most robots. Grinning underneath his mask, Izuku no longer saw a horde as a threat, but as practice dummies you find in the tutorial. Oh, he was definitely going to enjoy this. Adrenaline beating in his heart, he dashed forward. In less than a second his blade was drawn, swung, and sheathed in one smooth motion. Had someone blinked they would have missed the slice that carved through the metal like hot butter. However, any onlookers could see the aftermath of his actions. Izuku let his smirk grow wider as he heard the series of explosions going off behind him. He didn't have to look behind him to see the faces of the absolutely stunned student body behind him as they gawked at the remaining scrap metal. Not even 40 seconds ago they were watching him stutter harder than Porky the Pig. Now, he was the second born of the Shimada clan. He was the brother of Hanzo, Dragon of the West. He was Genji, mop of fluffy hair poking out from his head. His green visored mask was paired with metal shoulder pads sewed into the white hoodie. The strap buckle holding his sheath was wrapped around his shoulder and across the waist, futuristic-looking track pants and shoes streamlined with neon green. He mentally commended himself for his choice. Genji was not only quick and excelled in quick burst damage, but his ability to simultaneously dash into multiple opponents at once and regain the dash upon end allowed him to cut down swarms effortlessly. While other characters would perhaps offer more firepower or maybe even more speed, the ability alone made him too good to pass up. Not bothering to waste any time, he dashed away to find more robots. Around 4 seconds later, he came across a 2- and 3-pointer cornering an examinee with long blonde hair. Before he could even hear him briefly cussing out, "Murd," as shuriken slipped out between the slits on his metal gloves, throwing the shuriken into the joints of the scorpion-shaped 2-pointer to lock it in place. He severed its legs before quickly dashing forward to finish it off. The 3-pointer did its best to retaliate, firing many concussion missiles from its racks of rockets. Little did it know that it was only offering him ammunition as Izuku reached for his blade and held the handle with both hands. Standing his ground, he pulled out his blade in a defensive grip, sharp and turned upwards. Right as the missiles were about to hit, his arms worked to deflect all the projectiles to return them to its sender. They whirled around with expert precision, moving so quickly that the afterimages formed a shield. Before it knew it, the 3-pointer was blown backwards by its own concussive blasts, sending it flying into a nearby building and promptly destroyed. Circuits sparked from its corpse with the concrete wall forming cracks from the impact. Nodding in satisfaction, Izuku turned his attention to the blonde-haired boy. He extended a hand that was taken with a shaky but still grateful grip in response. Merci. Thank you for the assistance, he squeaked out. I was so sure I was going to be a splat on the sidewalk. In a time, Izuku responded. He noticed his voice sounded slightly distorted, as if it was put through a distortion filter. Just try to stay safe. We all have our own high scores to look out for, you know. The blonde nodded exuberantly. Yes, of course. They both quickly ran off, parting ways as they searched for more robots. Loading cutscene. Well, I will say that this particular batch certainly has merit, Netsu mused. He and the other teachers gathered together in a gallery. Several screens were displayed in front of them as they were connected to drones surveying the various battle arena. Several have shown rather impressive abilities in the field if the scrap metal is anything to go by. Many have shown to have powerfully combative abilities, yes, Cementos commented, such as the rather explosive Examinee 2345 in Center C, the bladed Examinee 7345 in Center F, or that pair teaming up in Center D. I thought we separated the youngins that went to the same school. Snipe turned his mask to Cementos with an eyebrow presumably raised. How did that happen? Is that even allowed? They didn't, Ectoplasm explained. Examinee 2467 simply started talking with 2455 and seemed to have formed a temporary alliance. A powerful one at that, given that 2467 has an acid quirk that appears to be conductible with 2455's electricity quirk. And to be fair, Snipe, there are no rules stating that they couldn't team up, Ken argued. But in only those 5 minutes, Midnight asked, mildly impressed. Damn, seems as though we have quite a few sociable ones this year, don't we, Eraser? Such vigor and energy is unmatched in today's youth after all. Eraserhead grunted. Calm yourself, Nimuri. They're still nothing but reckless children as of now. And besides, allies can only get you so far in the field. This exam is about one's own self-prowess. Relying on others does nothing but limit yourself here. On the contrary, Aizawa, working for the benefit of another can and does yield you rewards in turn, if both individuals agree to play their part. Netsu argued. It is only a matter of trust, not common among teenagers. It's why this loophole in the rules was even allowed in the first place, since hardly anyone ever uses it. Aizawa could only huff, not daring to argue back without at least 10 written and well-sourced essays stating why he was in the right, and even then he would prepare to lose. You do have to admit, teamwork is commendable, Mr. Aizawa. A new voice suddenly joined in. Head swiveled to meet the #1 hero in his emaciated form. Learning to cooperate with others is certainly a trait worthy of many heroes. All Might's voice faltered the moment he saw Aizawa's withering glare. He was quick to break eye contact and clear his throat, rubbing the back of his head abashed. But yes, personal achievement is very much the point of this test. Teamwork is to be learned for later in the school year for those that are accepted. The rest of the teachers slowly nodded while Eraserhead scoffed. While they were initially shocked at the revelation that All Might was hiding such a large injury and yet remains unretired, they found that the #1 hero was actually quite awkward. Most of them generally welcomed him though, except for Aizawa, who was indifferent at best or outright hostile at worst. Netsu flipped open his pocket watch and hummed. Around 15 minutes left in the exam. I say it's the proper time to release the 0-pointer, don't you think? The teachers all mumbled out their agreements, purposefully avoiding the principal's wide ear-to-ear smile that stretched from his lips, shrewd and sadistic as one could be. He pressed the large button placed next to his monitor and laid back, preparing to watch the rest of the show unfold. Stop. Do not release the zero pointers. The door was suddenly slammed open. Everyone turned their heads to find Powerloader dragging along two third-year support students by the ear. While no one could see Powerloader's expression through his mask, the pained faces of the support students conveyed it for him. Powerloader. Nezu was the first to greet him, intertwining his claws. Weren't you supposed to be at the support entrance exams? Powerloader huffed. I was, until these two knuckleheads came up to me, begging that I don't expel them. Growling, he shouldered the students who could only wince in response. Seriously, at what point of these past 2 months were you going to mention that you were going to modify the zero pointers for your final project? We had Nezu's permission. The first blubbered out, his classmate nodding frantically beside him. We overheard Nezu complaining that the zero pointers were too easy. Hes said he wanted to improve them for the upcoming entrance exam. We asked him about it and he told us we could work on a spare one as a prototype. The second wailed, rubbing her eyes with a handkerchief as she sobbed. IG guessed there must have been a mistake because when we checked this morning we found out the prototype got sent in instead. Please don't expel us, sir. The two bent down to dodge the position, heads planted to the ground as they pleaded for forgiveness. We never meant for the robot to. Oh, I know, Nezu casually said. I'm the one that approved sending it in there after all. All the focus that was on the students switched to the principal. Wide unblinking eyes that focused on the stoat-like creature and the absolute bombshell he dropped. I saw the changes you two made and was quite impressed. Nezu continued. I did say that I wanted to improve this entrance exam. No. Pandemonium erupted among the teachers, clamoring about the insanity of it all and whether Nezu finally lost it. Powerloader especially was roaring through his mask. His speech mostly filled with the scathing retort of lobotomized rats not knowing anything about safety precautions. The two students could do nothing but whimper and remain in their positions, waiting for the storm to blow over. Nezu let out a brief and shrill taxi whistle. That is quite enough, he calmly stated. Powerloader, you need not be concerned. I added my own precautionary measures to the altered zero-pointer, not to mention removing most of the lethal gear the robot had equipped. He turned his head to the two students, who whimpered under his beady-eyed gaze. As for your final project, I have already graded it and added it to your final report cards with 95 seconds. Well done. This grabbed their attention with a white-knuckled grip, their heads whipping upwards with disbelieving gazes. Powerloader possessed a similar expression. Nezu continued. While I will say that most of the gear you installed wouldn't be practical for school or hero work, the improvements to the robot's coding and design is, if I do say so myself, quite remarkable. Hadn't I known it was done by a support student, I could have easily mistaken it for a genuine support company's work. Teary-eyed, the students stood up and bowed so low their heads nearly touched their toes. Thank you, sir. The two then walked out the open office doors before Powerloader could object. Said Powerloader was gaping like a fish. Nezu, you cannot be. Nezu sipped his tea to interrupt him. Oh, but I can Majima. I simply heard two bright minds whose goals just so happened to coincide with mine, and just supported them throughout. Rest assured that if a student is to be harmed by the altered zero-pointer, I will take the blame. Nezu's smirk at that moment would have only been rivaled by Aizawa's when he found a fresh class to expel. Now run along. You still have the first years to proctor after all. Left with nothing left to stand, Powerloader stormed off. If one listened closely, they could hear him audibly grinding his teeth and grumbling out obscenities about rats once more. You know if Majima isn't going to have your head, Shuzenji will. Aizawa was the first to speak, breaking the silence since the support teacher had left. For once I agree with you. Aizawa glared at the 1B teacher as he watched Ken nod his head. She's already expressed her disapproval at the zero-pointers multiple times now. God knows how'd she react upon hearing the news that there's a Mark II. Speaking of which, Midnight turned her head to Nezu. What were the changes made to the robot anyway? Well, why don't we take a look, shall we? Nezu flipped through the cameras before eventually landing on camera F. All of the teachers' eyes collectively widened as they watched the metal behemoth tear through the street. Are those ion cannons? Snipe stuttered out. Are those even legal? Repulsion cannons, Nezu corrected. Think of the mines that we have for the sports festival but in laser form. Nezu, All Might stuttered out. You can't possibly think that they are only potential hero students. All Might. Nezu sipped his tea once more. If they wish to go into heroism as a career, they must learn how to deal with superior force. That is simply the nature of the job. Heavy prayers were muttered then under each teacher's breath, praying they wouldn't incur the wrath of not only Recovery Girl, but several rightfully furious parents. Izuku heard the rumbling before he saw it. Bits of circuit boards and steel frames started jumping up, the very concrete vibrating. What the hell? He muttered under his breath, grunting as he yanked his sword out of the chest of a three-pointer before sheathing it. He found a nearby fire escape on the side of an apartment. Scaling the length of the ladder, he hauled his body up to the rooftop before surveying the area. His eyes widened as he caught sight of the zero-pointer. What was his first thought when seeing the zero-pointer? Is that null sector? Yep. Much to Izuku's shock and horror, the zero-pointer perfectly mimicked the gargantuan robot from the Zero-Hour animatic. The only difference about it was the fact it had a fresh coat of green paint rather than the original white, and the fact it was twice as tall. Two large, bulky arms attached to the broadest shoulders imaginable slammed down on anything its path, ranging from cars, lampposts, and even other robots. The cannons attached to its arms were constantly firing 3 burst rounds of concussive energy orbs which sent both debris and students flying. Several racks of missiles were located on its collarbones, launching fresh volleys of rockets that devastated the city and blast the occasionally unlucky soul into the stratosphere. The only reason why anyone wasn't injured yet was the medical bots that were constantly diving in and picking up falling bodies or the unconscious. It roared, a deep whirring that shook the nearby buildings as its singular red eye tracked down fresh targets to shoot. Izuku whistled as he already started turning away to climb back down the ladder. Well, prayers to whoever's dumb enough to fight that thing. I'm out of here, he thought. While taking on the zero-pointer would certainly be a fun challenge, the fact that it was worth nothing along with the slim chance of success deterred him from attempting to do so. Maybe there was a slight chance of damaged robots left in its wake, but Izuku knew it would be more efficient to just target fresh ones. His logic was sound. The plan was foolproof, and for once he made a good plan and was able to act on it in time. Everything was set in place for him to turn away and get more points. So of course, all of that just had to get tucked into a neat ball and be smeared on the sidewalk when a scream suddenly rang through the air. He didn't even have time to even process the sound before his legs were already moving, sprinting towards the zero-pointer despite all of his prior thinking. As he raced to reach whoever may be in danger, leaping from rooftop to rooftop, he glumly thought to himself, prayers to me I suppose. Loading cutscene. Crap. Uraraka groaned as she squirmed and struggled in place. She was forced to watch her fellow examinees run as her leg pinned down from a boulder thrice her size. It was far too big for her to use her quirk on, and even if it was within her weight limit, she definitely didn't have the energy to. Honestly, she didn't know how it all went wrong so quickly. Not even 30 seconds ago she had a growing score of 29 when the rubble she reached for to use as her usual ammunition suddenly rumbled before exploding outwards. She was sent reeling back, arms shielding her face. When she opened her eyes once more, her jaw dropped at the behemoth of the robot that stood before her. Paralyzed from a sense of awe at the metal terror that was mere seconds from stomping her flat, it was only until an arm was only a few meters away that she had the sense to move. She squeaked as she barely dodged the sweeping attack from the robot. She tried her best to rush to the others when the robot dashed forward and slammed its fist into a nearby building and sent concrete cascading down in large chunks. Screaming as a sharp, intense pain jolted through her left leg, she crumpled forwards as a crack echoed out on the streets. Almost immediately after, hot tears sprang to her eyes as she cried out. Her teeth gritted against each other hard enough to create sparks. Help! She wheezed out for help under heavy, searing breaths. Help me, please, anyone. But as she looked up, she cursed as she only saw the other examinees running to leave her in the dust. She swore. Under normal circumstances she wouldn't have blamed them for fleeing, considering what they were up against and the fact they all had their own scores to look out for. Maybe they figured that since it was only a school, that she wouldn't be all that hurt. Evidently her left leg was proof that wasn't the case. Seeing as how no one seemed to be coming back for her, she twisted her head as far as she could to look at the robot. Out of the corner of her eyes she could see its beaming red pupil glaring down at her. Oh, hey big buddy. She weakly laughed, grinning at the robot's camera, who remained stone-faced. You got me. If think you could, I don't know, go after someone else now. The robot only continued to glower at her as its arm cannon began to charge once more. Uraraka's smile faded as her expression dropped like a stone. Shit, she swore, about to clench her eyes shut to prepare for the shot, only to spot someone out of the corner of her eye, a lithe short figure sprinting across the rooftops. With curiosity, hope, and a dash of desperation, she kept her eyes open to squint at the rapidly approaching individual. It was hard to tell exactly what he or she looked like due to the large distance and the dust in the area. However, Uraraka could still make out a sword, and was his armor glowing. Her attention was soon grabbed by the robot as he whirred loudly once more, eyes widening as slowly but surely the length of the cannon began to light with red, unstable electricity arcing up and down the gun. Uraraka gulped as the barrel lit up, death staring her right in the face. She didn't even have time to close her eyes, which looking back was probably a good thing. After all, she not only wouldn't have been able to see her grim fate be flipped on its head, but she also got a first impression with one of her strongest classmates. As the robot fired its shots, time seemed to slow. The large ion-like bullets approached her as if the very sun was colliding with the earth, a scorching, painless fatality that would last not even a second. And yet, the same figure from earlier said no to that. He looked at her and said no you to a hulking 10 don't even bother counting ton, armed war machine in a school exam. He was not only willing to help her, but willing to sacrifice his own score in the exam to do so. It was because of this and the fact of just how much of a hero he looked that she was stuck in complete and utter awe at what transpired next. As the bullet the size of a small elephant was being fired, the same ninja-like figure stepped in with his sword already out of his sheath, swinging his blade in a large arc from right shoulder to left waist. The orb met the sword head-on and was somehow reflected harmlessly into a portion of the street, despite the projectile being larger than the sword, larger than his person really. He deflected it, sending it flying to the sky. He then proceeded to do it 2 more times with the next shots as well, batting the second into a nearby wall with a slash to the side, and slashing from his hip to midsection to send the third and last shot back at the robot itself. Hitting the robot in the dead center of its chest, it was launched backwards into a building a near 100 meters away. Metal groaned and concrete crumbled as the giant was soon laying in a pile of rubble. Everyone who was previously running from the zero-pointer turned around with complete bewilderment and shock at the display of power, several slowly walking back with caution and the rest soon following. She'll admit that it left a slightly bitter taste in her mouth at the fact they only looked back after someone came to save her. But the image of her savior with steam radiating off of his blade as it glowed red from sheer heat, sunlight gleaming off of the cyborg ninja's mask and green mop of messy hair as he slid his sword back into its black leather sheath. Oh yeah, it more than made up for it. She would have thanked him on the spot if she could, but words didn't seem to work for her at the moment. Her lips refused to move, her tongue wouldn't budge. The last time she was as tongue-tied as this was when Soshu-kun asked her out for prom during 6th grade. This was unsurprisingly a whole lot better than being asked out to prom. Instead, the cyborg turned to her, neon green visor beaming down at her with concern with a pair of black sweatpants and white hoodie. Okay, calm down. Ochako could geek out later. Right now, she had to confront her savior. Are you all right? He asked. His voice was slightly distorted, robotic sounding but no less attractive. Mature? Yes, she meant mature. She barely managed to stammer out her response. Oh yeah, totally. I'm picky keen. Before he could respond, however, a booming roar echoed across the streets and rolled off of her, leaving nothing but fear in its wake. Her eyes moved to the zero-pointer as it began to stand up, shaking off some rubble on its shoulder. Steam huffed from the cracks in its armor, glaring down from afar at the David that dared oppose its Goliath. He, however, remained undeterred. In the blink of an eye, he turned to her and swung. A flash of green appeared as the large concrete chunk pinning her to the floor suddenly split in half. If she didn't hear the blade slide into its sheath once more, she would have assumed the rock split on its own. Quickly muttering out, "Go get someone to help you with your leg," he suddenly turned his head to the crowd. Uraraka followed his eyes only to frown, much to her disappointment. As Uraraka looked upon the crowd, she noticed most of the examinees were still nervously shuffling in place. All of them seemed to be making hushed mutters as they exchanged looks from each other, to the steel stranger, to the robot in trepidation. For a brief second she thought her rescuer would be forced to fight the zero-pointer on his own. He quickly cleared his throat before speaking. "Oi, are you all gonna help me or what?" he shouted out. Uraraka's eyes widened as she realized what he was doing, more so the sheer boldness of it. "You lot wanna be heroes, right? Then show them why we're here. F points. This is a matter of doing the right thing." Pumping up his fist in the air, he yelled out, "If this is what heroes do, then let's be heroes together. Plus ultra." He then turned on his heel to sprint at the zero-pointer. At this, several blinked before charging forward with him. Seeing several foes sprinting at him, the zero-pointer narrowed its eye as it followed suit. Engines on the back of its legs activated, roaring jets kicking in with blue flames blasting behind its legs as it practically skated across the concrete. It reached alarming speeds as it reached the Iron Ninja near instantly. Uraraka's eyes widened as it raised a fist before slamming it downwards just before it reached him, only for the stranger to dash to the side and send a trio of shurikens at the robot's face, 2 sticking in its metal plating and the third a mere inch from its eye. The zero-pointer was quick to react. His open-palmed fist reached to grab him, clawing the foundation of a fake shop with ease. Uraraka gasped as he quickly jumped to dodge before scaling the building, pulling himself up to the safety of a nearby roof and peppering his face with shurikens once more. She was forced to pull her attention away from him though when the same navy-haired boy from earlier was suddenly in front of her with hand outstretched. She gratefully took it, pulling herself up. "Thank you." She bowed as low as she could with her limp. He shook his head with a solemn expression on his face. "Do not thank me. Had it not been for him, then I would have run away like the others." As a potential hero student, it is shameful to have to look upon the selfless action of another in order to act. Hey, don't look at it that way. Anyone would have hesitated to go against that thing. She was quick to cheer him up. "I'm pretty sure everyone was inspired by him too anyways," she pointed out, gesturing to the several dozen examinees that rushed past her as they belted out their various battle cries with quirks activated and ready. There were so many of them and so many different things happening at once that anyone without an analysis quirk would have been overwhelmed by information overload. One student rubbed their hands together furiously until the skin was colored a boiling red and steam was pouring off their palms. Another with metal spikes for hair yanked apart his bangs to form a pair of scimitars. The most notable was probably a giant ape-like beast charging on all fours, the primate roaring to bare its teeth before jumping to the roof of a nearby building and then climbing the robot. Soon enough, the zero-pointer found itself being pelted by a whole assortment of projectiles ranging from fireballs to rocks to alarm clocks and surrounded by an army of students. Normally, had they charged like they did, they would have been crushed due to their large numbers hampering their movement and the robot's large AI attacks. But with the steel ninja continuing to harass the robot with dashes and a seemingly infinite supply of shuriken, the rest were free to damage it as much as it pleased. Indeed, it is truly a sight to see, he agreed. But nevertheless, we should run while we can. With your injured leg, it's not safe for you to stay on the battlefield without immediate medical attention. Uraraka nodded her head and was about to start limping after him when a pale, wiry hand firmly grasped her by the shoulder. Hello, a shaky voice suddenly spoke. Why, you need help with that? Both the navy-haired boy and Uraraka jumped, causing the newcomer to squeak. They turned around to see a petite girl with long gray bangs obscuring everything about her face except for a button nose, a small mouth and sunken cheeks. Uraraka was quick to apologize. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were there. She waved off her concerns with a shaky hand. And no, it's okay. She peeped. I just saw the crowd and was about to follow them when I saw you guys. Why, you have a broken leg, right? Yes, that much is true. The Navy confirmed. Are you here to help me take her to one of the staff? She rapidly shook her head. And no, I have a better idea. He bunched his eyebrows together. What do you? Without warning, the girl suddenly unhinged her mouth, cracking the bones in her jawline as the cheeks expanded wide to reveal rows of serrated teeth and a thin tentacle-like tongue with a barbed end. While her hair still covered the upper half of her face, the lower half was now a swirling vortex of sharp edges and spittle as the teeth roughly gnashed against each other. The two instinctively jumped back at her horrifying visage. Whoa, what are you doing? But Uraraka's voice faltered as she started to exhale a white mist-like breath from the vortex, the fog swarming around her injured leg. The boy's eyes widened and would have moved to shove the girl away if Uraraka hadn't suddenly let out a sigh of relief. Turning to her leg, his jaw fell agape as the mist seemed to seep into her skin, sinking into the break before Uraraka pulled herself up on two legs, shakily testing out her previously broken leg before walking forward with no issue. How did you? He stuttered. Life mist, my cue quirk, she explained, her jaw cracking eerily as it shifted back to normal. I can generate this white mist to heal and energize others, though I do have a limited supply. A healing quirk with such versatility. The navy-haired teen mused. That is an impressive quirk for a healer, perhaps for even a support hero. Well, I'll say, Uraraka exclaimed, performing some stretches on her leg with a wide smile. Saying it was purely a healing quirk did not do it justice for the sheer amount of energy flowing through her at the moment. She felt as though her legs were springs ready to burst and her arms were powered by motors. She could take the zero-pointer, no 3 zero-pointers like this. All the previous sickness from the overuse of her quirk seemed to fade away too, as though the very drawbacks of her quirk were completely removed. I can hardly feel anything. And it was so quick too. What's your name? Why, Yuri Shikufuku. The girl peeped. WHW, what are your names? Uraraka was about to respond when the boy cut her off. While it will be good to introduce ourselves later, do keep in mind that we are in the middle of an exam by Kami. The two suddenly looked to where Ada was pointing only to sharply gasp. The robot, realizing it was in the midst of being swarmed, unleashed another volley of missiles. While they were previously much easier to dodge due to distance and the small explosion radius, that didn't matter with everyone so clumped up together. No, Uraraka cried. They could see a bright shine of green as the ninja dashed in front of the attack and did his best to reflect back as many rockets as he could, forcing the machine to take a step back with a light groan as several impacted his chest. But there were simply too many. Dozens of examinees were sent flying in the air with 100 more blasted into buildings or skidding across the streets. The only relief they had was the sudden influx medical bots quickly flying in to prevent the airborne examinees from being injured, catching several with woven nets before dropping them safely to the ground. Those with severe wounds such as broken arms and fractured bones quickly followed a few medical robots to the medical ward. 2 examinees flew so far they found themselves lying at their feet, a red-head and silver-haired examinee skidding across the street to land directly in front of them. One had jagged sharp edges to their skin with a rocky texture while the other appeared to be made of solid steel, which explained how both of them seemed to be uninjured. Yuri squeaked as their dazed eyes glazed over the small group. Did we win? They both simultaneously groaned. Not exactly, Uraraka admitted. But the exam is about to end soon anyway, so we should probably start heading back or looking for some last-minute robots. Nodding their heads, the two attempted standing up only to immediately collapse at the same time. Oh, let me help. Yuri dashed over to them. She opened her mouth wide once more, exhaling more of her mist which split to surround their heads. While they initially jerked at the sight, they soon found that their headaches vanished and could stand up straight. "Whoa, that's trippy," the steel guy muttered, looking at his arms in awe as he pulled himself up. "Yeah, no kidding." Smiling, he stood up and extended a hand to Yuri. "But also cool as heck. What's your name, bro?" "Mine's Kirishima Ijiro and this guy's Tetsu. Thanks for the healing." She seemed to shrink at the enthusiastic greeting. My name's Yuri." But before she could introduce herself, another examinee cried out, "Look!" In alarm, the group, along with any examinees still standing, watched the battle between the verdant samurai and the robot in horror. "Nezu, that's enough." Midnight was the first to snap, slamming her fist on this desk as she stood up to furiously glare at the dean. "Stop this madness, or so help me I will call President Mike to end the exams myself." "Agreed." Kan scowled at the principal. The brunette nearly getting blasted to next week and back was one thing, but even for third years this is insane. That monstrosity of a robot has already devastated both the arena and injured several dozen. Cementos gritted out between his stone teeth. "We already have the threat of countless lawsuits aimed at our backs. Why must we continue? That damn boy could have his spine snapped in half for all we know." Snipe hissed. "What, you think Recovery Girl's gonna do sit for that?" I must concur, Nezu. Even during my time at UA this exam would be considered ludicrous. Nonetheless, for not even first years. All Might shakily added. "And this at once. Stop this damn madman. You must." A shrill taxicab whistle shrieked through the air once more, only twice as loud. Once the teachers reluctantly silenced themselves, he spoke. "I understand all of your concerns." Nezu spoke, his voice quiet and controlled considering the intense atmosphere of the room. "But I assure you that there is reasoning behind my actions, and that if any examinee was put in actual harm then I would have already signaled President Mike to end the exam." "You don't call this harm, you sadistic rat." Midnight seethed. "Pardon my language, but that is some fresh horseshit if I've ever seen it," Snipe remarked. "Only reason why that miss is still standing is cause of the healer that just so happened to be in the area. And have you considered that's the exact reason why Nezu launched the zero-pointer there in the first place?" Aizawa snapped, his red-eyed glare ever present. Several teachers who were seated around the man jumped, briefly forgetting his presence as he had yet to comment on the zero-pointer. "Oh," Nezu raised an eyebrow as he turned his head to the teacher. "Could you elaborate, Aizawa?" The disgruntled teacher huffed, rolling his eyes. "Had any of you taken the time to look through Center F's list of examinees, you'd notice that he deliberately spawned the robot in an area chock full of individuals with durability-assisting quirks. Examinees 5534 and 4355 to name a few. This paired with an increased number of medic bots and examinee 2311, who has a healing quirk, makes this no rash decision. But even with the precautions, the increased difficulty of the zero-pointer will in turn decrease point values as more and more examinees get incapacitated, deeming it unfair," Cementos pointed out. Like threatening the lives of children wasn't already a good enough excuse to end the exam already. Both Midnight and Ken grumbled. "Oh no, I don't disagree with you two on that," Eraserhead stated. "While I firmly believe that life is naturally unfair and people should take it as such, I draw a firm line on what is unfair and what should is considered downright illogical." Aizawa glared up at the rodent, who remained impassive. He continued, "It makes no sense that you've only improved the zero-pointer for one exam site and not the others as well. Even if you couldn't get the resources to replace all of them, the sensible decision would be to add them in for next year. This is more than the exam. You're planning something, aren't you, Nezu?" Nezu gave away nothing more than an unreadable shrug and small grin that didn't quite fit on his shrewd face. "I have no idea what you could be talking about, Aizawa. I simply didn't have enough time to remodel the zero-pointers in all the exam areas, and given that my colleagues in the HPSC have been pressuring me to increase the difficulty of the entrance exam, I figured I might as well have a test run rather wait what could very well be several years before we prepare enough robots for all the exam centers. Consider this, me finally indulging in their requests." Every teacher simultaneously thought, "Yeah right, you damn mole rat." It was no secret that the principal despised the commission with every fiber of his being, constantly fighting their representatives for just how much freedom UA has over its unique curriculum. The chances of the two working together would be equivalent to Best Genus doing a face reveal, or Endeavor being civil in a fan meet and greet. What was far more likely, on the other hand, was that Nezu wanted to go on a sadistic streak and wanted to use the commission as a scapegoat for the backlash that came with it. It essentially ended two birds with one stone, sating Nezu's need for controlled chaos, while also giving the one-fingered salute to the HPSC. but Nezu carried on regardless. But I digress. We have an exam to focus on after all. An exam that will be ending in relatively 5 or so minutes. So the teachers continued watching, all of them collectively wincing as a certain camera zoomed in on a particular green-haired individual. Loading cutscene. No, Uraraka cried out as the samurai was hit. After the missile volleys, he targeted the large racks on its backs by climbing up its arms before dashing to slice them off. While he was successful in cleaving one clean in half, the robot managed to catch him in a devastating backhand in an attempt for the second. Body sent flailing several dozen meters away from the makeshift group. He was sent crashing onto the ground below, forming a small crater at the impact. Falling to the sidewalk, he lay unmoving. Without a moment of hesitation, she made to run forward. Thinking nothing of the zero-pointer and the threat it posed, rescuing the boy was her new priority. And Uraraka was gonna be damned if she let some big metal bully try and stop her. It didn't stop him from saving her after all. Uraraka immediately rushed at the robot only to be held back by the navy-haired boy. No, you were injured. Even if we were to attempt to assist him, we can't be sure if you're fully healed, he started. Snarling, she wrestled her arm out of his grip. Let go of me. Uraraka sprinted at the machine, only for the zero-pointer to turn its gaze to them. Horror consumed the group as the robot began to hum, its chest thrumming with the same red energy from before. Everyone reacted at a speed that seemed far too slow. Both Kirishima and Tetsu climbed up to their feet in alarm, rushing ahead. Move, Eri yelled out, but by then it was already too late. The compartment opened up, revealing a cannon thrice as large as the blasters lined along its arms. Electricity flowed through the open cannon near its center, the zero-pointer roaring across the street before a massive beam shot out. Both Uraraka and the boy's eyes widened. Uraraka didn't even have to look at her impending doom to know that there was no time to run. Given how the boy was also glued to his feet, he realized the same. Instinctively raising their arms to shield themselves from their fate, they braced for impact. For the second time that day, each second seemed to clock by in slow motion. It was all too similar to how Uraraka faced the robot when she was trapped under the rubble. Only now, there was nobody saving her now. Well, that's what she thought at least. Only loud incoming steps could be heard moments before the impact. Bare milliseconds before the laser would have hit the students, a voice shouted, "Get behind me." Before Uraraka could even process what she said, the light was suddenly reflected right in front of them, a voice crying out in pain as several beams were redirected into several crumbling buildings. A shrill warcry pierced through the air as the laser focused down on the invisible shield. "AHHH," the girl's voice screamed. The sheer intensity of the heat alone made her take a knee as she clenched her eyes and gritted her teeth. She barely managed to raise her arms and open her chest to allow the large beam to hit across her entire body. The others, only seeing the laser being reflected by nothing but air, were baffled beyond belief. How? The navy-haired boy probably would have begun to question his reality for a second time that day, when he was interrupted by a sharp grunt. "My quirk, it lets me redirect light," a feminine voice growled. Smoke began flowing off an invisible figure, grooves digging into the road as she was slowly being pushed back. Her frame shook and wavered, the absolute agony being barely withstandable. "But I can't do it for long," she groaned out. "If you still want to run, now's your cha." Oh, if that. She was cut off as Tetsu immediately stood up and started running to her, banging his steel fists hard enough to create sparks, as if I'd stand by like some unmanly wimp. What are you?" "Same here." Kirishima grinned viciously as he ran over as well. "I've only met you guys like 2 minutes ago, but I'm already willing to die with you. Die with me." But the voice was quickly stunned into silence as they took up their places beside her. With a quick nod of confirmation, the two gritted their teeth as they raised their arms to dip into the light. The girl was utterly shocked as 2 more screams joined the air. What are you effing idiots doing?" The girl hissed. "What, you think some rock or steel is gonna stop UV lights? My quirk makes me resilient to them and I still get burned. Start running now or you think I care? You think I give a shit about what this is gonna do to me?" Kirishima roared, undeterred by the fact his rock-like skin was beginning to bubble and that his arms were screaming in pain. "My whole life I spent asking myself whether my quirk can protect me from this or that. Not today. Never again. I came to you to prove my mettle. To run now is unforgivable." Tetsu screamed out. His arms were turning into a molten red color, his fists colored a concerning orange and quickly developing into a blazing yellow. The two teens eventually took a step forward to take in all of the beam, much to the girl's surprise. "We will stand strong," Kirishima roared. "We will be unbreakable," Tetsu bellowed. "We will be your shield." The two pushed together, each step taken cracking the concrete beneath their feet. Even though Kirishima resembled a cracked gargoyle with painful bubbles popping all over his face, he pressed on. Even though Tetsu's arms were more molten slag than bone and skin, he pressed on. Even at a disadvantage and hopelessly outpowered, they stood strong as they pressed on. It was then and there where the girl joined in, muttering out, "You lot are damn crazy," before stepping forward with them. It was hard to differentiate their war cries from their own, each of their cries and shouts melding into one another, blending so much adrenaline and vigor to the point where anyone watching the scene could practically taste it. Incredible, Uraraka couldn't help muttering in awe. She knew the hero course was going to be a lot to handle, but this, while she and her family never had the luxury of a TV, she could easily imagine this scene being from some form of high-quality anime. "No more running," Tetsu roared. "No more hiding," the girl shouted. "This is the coolest thing I've ever done." Kirishima laughed. At that moment, while no one could actually tell due to the bright lights that enveloped the three of them, both the invisible girl and Tetsu turned to look at him strangely. He had the nerve to look sheepish and quickly mutter out, "Sorry," before looking down at his feet. But besides the single moment of awkward staring, Uraraka and Yuri probably would have spent hours looking upon the scene in complete shock and awe had not the navy-haired boy quickly reminded them what was at stake. "They only bought us a few moments. We must hurry," he urged. "Whatever we choose to do, we must act now. I am not leaving him. That is not an option." Uraraka growled. "But your injury," Ida started. "Oh, would you just F off about my damn injury?" Uraraka hissed. "Listen, it's not just about paying back a favor or something stupid like that, all right? We came to this school to be heroes, to save people, right?" She analyzed both Ida's and Yuri's faces for any signs of doubt, silently satisfied when she found none. Uraraka continued, "If we want to prove we belong here at UA, then how can we turn our backs to the person who sacrificed everything for some strangers he didn't even know? How are we going to turn our backs to someone who went above and beyond like a hero would? How? Oh my god, would you morons hurry up already?" The invisible girl groaned, interrupting the shining gazes both Ida and Yuri had as their source of inspiration was cut off. "Forget the fancy-ass inspiration speech, just go." The three of them blinked before nodding. "Look, you get my point," Uraraka concluded. "We should save him because it's the right thing to do." Ida nodded in agreement. "Very well. Me and Yuri will be the ones to heal him." Uraraka was immediately about to protest the absurdity of excluding the person who came up with the rescue plan in the first place when Yuri jumped in. It's the only thing that makes sense, Uraraka. I'm the only one here that can heal him and Ida's the only one who can bring me there quickly enough." Cursing, she finally relented. "Fine, but let me at least help," Uraraka insisted. "I can make things weightless for a while. Should be much easier to carry her." "All right," Yuri squeaked. There was a noticeable blush on her cheeks that was quickly shaken off. "Just make sure to deactivate it once I get there." Uraraka nodded in confirmation, and without a second to waste she placed an open palm on Yuri's shoulder, the vertigo briefly causing her to sway before she pushed it aside. The pale-faced girl yelped as she was suddenly sent floating into the air before being grabbed by the boy and sent piggybacking onto him. "Let us go." His jet thrusters burst to life as he dashed forward at impossible speeds. Yuri was left crying out as she clung onto his back like a koala. Uraraka hoped that Yuri at least had enough time to clam her eyes shut to protect against the G-force. Loading cutscene. Of all the things Ida was expecting from the hero course, acting as an impromptu ambulance was not one of them. He especially did not expect to be doing so for someone he so easily disregarded early on in the exam. He saw him earlier loudly muttering in the prep area earlier and was tempted to give half his mind about his blatant disregard for the exam and those taking it. He even gave him the benefit of the doubt. He assured himself that if he wishes to not take this exam seriously, it is only he who will suffer the consequences. However, that was shortly proven untrue when he caught him not only muttering to himself once more, but loud enough to cause nearby examinees discomfort. Put up with the sheer amount of disrespect from the boy. He made his way to scold him for his rambunctious behavior, perhaps convince him to either quiet down or dissuade him from taking the exam at all if he were to be this careless about it. Then the exam started. Present Mike called out the beginning of the exams, and he was one of the first to leave, sprinting forwards faster than even he could react. Though he was mostly focused on destroying his own, he could see through the corner of his eye how he tore through 3 and 2 pointers with his blade and seemingly countless shuriken. Then he saw the girl pinned down by the rubble, trapped and at the mercy of the 0-pointer. Though he initially moved to go assist her, upon seeing others fleeing the scene and reasoning to himself that there would be no way that UA would possibly let one of their potential students be mortally wounded, he ran away. He, a future hero with the prospects of running towards those that would do others harm and to always be there to be able to run to help others no matter how far away they may be, willingly ran from a threat and someone who needed assistance. And that one boy didn't. He came from what could have been a few streets away fighting his own battles, and saved her when no one else would. It was at that moment then, even before his speech to unite the rest of the examinees and his clash with the 0-pointer, that he recognized that that green-haired teenager was the superior student. So even if he didn't imagine himself here, he would be damned if he willingly left one of his superiors to die. Given the looks of the others standing beside him as well, they felt the same way. Well, feeling the same way about saving him, of course. There do seem to be a few that have some apprehensions to high speeds. Slow down, Yuri shrieked. She had her head tucked into his shoulder with the grip on his shoulders as tight as a vise. I apologize, Yuri, he managed to blurt out. But time is of the essence here. Yeah, but you don't have to look out. Yuri urgently pointed at the incoming rubble as part of the diverted laser hit the building above them and dislodged an entire balcony only a few meters away. Cursing, he cut off his engines and grit his teeth as he ducked down into a slide, sharply twisting his leg to his side and stretched it out at an angle. His track shoes smoked as he skidded across the concrete, holes burning through the soles as he struggled to turn. Right when the balcony would have fallen on them, he barely managed to stop in time, pausing in place before kicking up his engines once more to sprint directly at the robot. Ada breathed out a sigh of relief. That was far too close of a call. Are you all right, Yuri? And never better, she stuttered, her grip on his shoulders now tight enough to leave bruises with her cheeks somehow paler than before. There was a possibility that she could have turned a shade paler the moment she realized what they would have to do. Wait, why can't we find a different route that goes around it? Not enough time, I'm afraid. But there being only a few minutes left on the clock, we cannot spare a moment searching for alternate streets that may already be blocked by rubble. He finished, kicking up the engines in his legs to third gear as he approached and passed by the robot, whose beam was still concentrated on the previous team. But no worries, with our colleagues currently distracting it, we should be able to pass by without it noticing our presence. However, Ida forgot that in order to pass by someone or something while remaining undetected, it's a good idea to not speak with the equivalent volume of the average person yelling into a microphone. The robot's head turned, shutting off its chest beam, and with a roar began to chase after them. The previous three collapsed to the ground, unconscious with various second and close to third degrees burns littering their body. OF, it noticed our presence, Yuri cried. It definitely noticed our presence. Language. Yuri turned to the Ida with a mix of anxiety, exasperation, incredulity, and a pinch of deadpan written all over her face. Despite her eyes still being covered by her hair, she managed to communicate her expression just fine. A 2,000 gigaton robot is sprinting at us and you're concerned about my language. It's a hero's job to be a role model through even the darkest of times. Ida called out. After all, sticks and stones may break bones, but words can truly hurt. The robot, seeing as it wasn't going to be able to stop them in time, picked a nearby chunk of debris in its hand before pitching it at the two of them with a loud mechanical grunt. As he turned his head around at the sound, his eyes widened as he gulped at the rock hurtling towards them. Oh dear, Yuri followed suit by swallowing as well. TT, that seems like a pretty big-ass stone. Ida gripped onto Yuri's legs tighter with a determined exhale. I didn't think I would have to use this so soon, he muttered. Use what so soon? But before Yuri could finish her question, she was cut off by a loud shout. RECIPRO burst. In the blink of an eye, they zoomed forward, the boulder completely missing its mark. She didn't even have enough time to curse before the G-force slammed into her face like a speeding truck once more, blowing back her cheeks comedically and her hair splaying out behind her. Once his engines stalled, he slowed down to a walking pace, the robot far behind them. Phew, that was rather close. He wiped his forehead with the sleeve of his arm before turning back to Yuri. Yuri, are you all right? His voice quickly faltered when he was greeted with not the meek expression he was expecting, but rather the monster with the stretched-out jaw and whip of a tongue from earlier, only this time with its upper half face revealed as one giant bloodshot eye. Ada couldn't help but flinch as the cyclopsish-like pupil blinked at him, the iris and sclere sporting several blood fissures to form a demonic pattern. Oga esratem tu yabative disapuoi, the gravelly voice hissed, a garbled speech that was low and warped beyond recognition. Pardon, he barely managed to stutter out. Yabati, it repeated. Oga esratem tu me ib disapuoi. It was then an audible sigh was heard before Yuri raised a hand to the bottom of her jaw and the top of her head. With several loud and disturbing cracks, she compressed her gaping maw back into normal. I said, why you left him about 20 meters behind us, she squeaked. We each have to go back. Ada was tempted to spend the next 5 minutes furiously cleaning his glasses and rubbing his eyes to make sure he saw what he saw. It was difficult after all to view this elfish figure and the crossbreed between a Wendigo and a Cyclops as one and the same. But nevertheless, he obediently walked back and dropped her off at her destination. Loading cutscene. She managed to slip off with shaky legs as they approached the crater, having to adjust her weight as Uraraka gave her back her gravity. Groaning, the verdant samurai turned to slowly gaze up at them with a dazed look, possibly concussed. His metal exoskeleton of armor had several dents, with his hoodie and sweatpants sporting several cuts and gashes in his leg. Wires sparked underneath his ruined clothing as the electronics inside went haywire. The only thing that remained relatively undamaged was his mask, and even then the light in his visor seemed to be flickering. If it hadn't been for his previous actions, Yuri would have been rather underwhelmed by the barely conscious boy in front of her. Height-wise, she figures he was only a few inches taller than her, which wasn't saying much when she barely broke 5 feet. His fluffy green hair that had been revealed when his hood had been torn off made him seem even more childlike, his physique being on the leaner side of things not helping either. But then Yuri reminded herself of the way he acted earlier, the commanding voice she heard echoing across the arena. The passion put behind his words themselves made her want to blindly charge at the robot herself despite her usual apprehension to combat. There was also the fact that he soloed the zero-pointer and held him at bay for several minutes, a Herculean task that several dozen examinees working together failed to do. So there was that. Overall, she wasn't about to judge a book by its cover. Much like her, there was something about the raw power in his quirk and the sheer determination he had when wielding it that made it so he wasn't to be trifled with. She approached cautiously. Hello. Go. He grumbled as he slumped back, laying his head on the concrete. Whatever filter he had installed in his mask must have been damaged as his voice whirred into highs she didn't even know were possible for a voice crack to go. 5 more minutes, Mum. I just need 5 more minutes to finish this low-level miniboss, I swear. She stifled a giggle at his antics. So much for not judging a book by its cover. I am afraid that's not possible. Why, you must come with us. Please do. It is of utmost importance that we... Hey. He moved his head back and forth between the two, rubbing bleary eyes. Are you two my guardian angels? Did you come to res me? Just like that, her entire worldview was promptly shattered as her usually ashen face was inflamed to a rosemary red. She whirled back as if she was slapped. Ada's eyebrows rose several inches as he too comprehended what he said. Well, are you? He asked. The somehow innocent look he managed to pull off while delirious was not only impressive but infuriating. How about we just get you healed up? Without a moment more of hesitation, she activated her quirk, bones creaking and cracking once more as she stretched her jaw and exhaled. Letting the mist flow through to him, she once again fought the urge to suck in. It was significantly harder this time due to something about his quirk making it all the more alluring for life mist. What it was she did not know. All she did know was that she had a job to do. Several gashes across his skin sewn themselves together with bruises beginning to fade as well. Once she was done, he refocused, shaking his head with a much clearer groan. He sat up, pressing a hand to his mask as he looked at the boy and her. She blinked. He blinked right back. Hi, he greeted, though it was stated more of a question than anything. Hello. She responded right back. Awkward silence. It would appear that whoever she was saving was just as inept as her in conversation. Who are you two? He asked. Didn't the exam already end? Not yet. I assume we still have a few minutes left. The navy-haired explained. We came to rescue you after we saw you take that hit from the zero-pointer. He snapped his fingers with a metallic clink. Right. Damn, I still need to wait. The zero-pointer. Where is it? Where is what now? Yuri started to ask, only to yelp when the boy suddenly grabbed her shoulders with surprising agility considering his injury. The zero-pointer, where is it? He asked urgently, slightly shaking her shoulders with just enough force to cause her head to rattle. If I don't finish that thing off, it's gonna og. Yuri's eye widened as his chest folded and he crumpled in on himself, quickly rushing forwards to catch him. She cursed. Shoot, he's not fully healed. Some of his wounds must be internal as well. What? You can't just use your quirk on him again? The Navy asked. If he's not fully healed the first time, that must mean his injuries are too severe and I need more mist to heal the rest. Yuri explained. Well, how do you get more mist? Ada asked. She pursed her lips. I need to drain someone of their stamina. She winced at the two's raised eyebrows. As in, you have to take stamina from someone else in order to? Why, yeah. She clenched her eyes shut, awaiting the harsh glares or disgusted looks that were guaranteed to come, only to be surprised by what the navy-haired said next. Well, then I will gladly sacrifice myself if that must be done. Her eyes flew open with her mouth left ajar, trying her damnedest not to activate her quirk as she was rendered speechless. You would. Yes, I would, he loudly proclaimed. While my muscles may be sore and my engine stalled from my performance thus far in the exam, my mind is still full of adrenaline and vigor. I am more than willing to sacrifice it for the greater good. No, you don't have to, the Greenette grunted. I don't need heals to take on that mid-tier bucket of bolts. The ninja heaved himself to his feet only to collapse to the ground once more. While I do find your determination admirable, it is terribly misplaced. The taller boy scolded. You are in no shape to stand, nonetheless to fight. But I can. No, enough of this. He turned to the gray-haired girl. If you are to heal him, you must do so now, quickly. But, just do it, Yuri, he yelled, turning to the gray-haired girl as he did so. Without a moment more of hesitation, she activated her quirk once more, her maw expanding forth once more. She knew that her jaw would be incredibly sore by the end of this exam, but that was the least of her concerns at the moment. Right now, she needs to focus to make sure she doesn't accidentally end the poor boy. Giving into the urges, she begins to pull rather than give, her demonic maw sucking in mist rather than expelling it out. Almost immediately, the boy begins to feel the effect as he stumbles to one knee and grits his teeth, visibly strained as the ethereal substance pours out of him. Mustn't waver, she mentally groaned. Mustn't take too much. The whispers at the back of head howled with glee as she finally fed them in what felt like forever. Too familiar was this feeling, the white gas filling her with glee and pleasure as it was sucked from his bones and muscle tissue. It made her want to vomit just how effing good it felt to take rather than give. It was an urge she submitted herself to far too many times in the past. But she wouldn't now, she refused to. She refused to be her father. She refused to follow in his footsteps like she had. Just as her reserves were about to be full and the boy about to collapse from exhaustion, she closed her maw before retargeting to the green-haired boy from earlier. The mist poured out to heal him once more. This time he breathed out a more stable sigh of relief as he pulled himself to his feet, standing on shaky legs. He flexed his muscles. "Oh yeah, that hit the stuff," he muttered, spawning shurikens in between his fingers and nodding in satisfaction as they slipped out. On the flip side, the navy-haired boy looked as though he was about to pass out on the floor. Groggy, he barely managed to lift his head off the floor, and even that seemed to be a strain for him. That was, certainly, an experience. He slurred. It was not painful, I'll give it that. His face then immediately planted itself back into the concrete, where he lay unmoving. Yuri instantly went to his side, checking his vitals and letting out a sigh of relief when she felt the stable pulse, albeit weaker than normal. I can take care of him. You should head to the others to make sure they're all right." "Yeah, I should probably." His voice seemed to falter, however, as when he turned his vision to the rampaging zero-pointer, eyes widened at the small injured group that was right in its path. What is it?" She grew concerned at his sudden silence. "Is the robot approaching us?" Suddenly blanching, she realized what was happening in front of her. She watched in horror as the boy who sacrificed himself for every other examinee here, haplessly throwing himself in front of a literal gun in order to deflect the shots, was seeing the rest of the examinees being targeted by the same robot. She knew it didn't matter to him that he was lying injured in a massive crater not even 30 seconds ago. She knew it didn't matter to him that the exam was about to be over, and even then the teachers wouldn't allow an examinee to actually be hurt. Just from the tone of his voice and the way he kept staring at that damn robot, she knew what he was about to do. Immediately standing up, she quickly walked to where he was standing and grabbed his shoulder, causing him to flinch at her touch. Don't you do it," she warned. "I don't know what you could do against that TT thing, but whatever it is, it's not worth it." He didn't respond, continuing to stare as the robot approached Uraraka and the rest of them. If she squinted, she could see smoke pouting off from an invisible outline and two charred figures. Hey, are you listening to me? I know what you said earlier, but this is not the time for any of that. We didn't come back to heal you just so you could go back in again. You've done anew. If I could take down that thing in one move, and I choose not to, does that make me a good hero?" he asked. She blinked, mentally stumbling at the interruption. That's not. If I had the power to take on that thing and save everyone here, and I chose to walk away, doesn't that make me a coward?" he asked again. A rare frustrated scowl developed on her lips, baring sharp teeth as she did so. She knew exactly what she was trying to do. "No, not if you're injured." "But I'm not." He made sure of it. He gestured to the blue-haired boy who was currently laid down and snoring obscenely loud, ironic considering the firm and formal way he spoke earlier. "Because of you too, I can stand and walk once more." "Yes, you can stand." "Not fig," she started. "If I can walk, then that means I can fight. And if I can fight, that means I can help." Several small ticks were beginning to develop on her forehead. That doesn't mean you should." "You don't. I can't do anything else." He suddenly snapped, causing her to jump back. "Don't you get it? If I choose to stand here while others are being hurt, that just makes me a powerless coward." He turned to Yuri, and though she couldn't see his face through the make, it made his next word no less intimidating. "I will not be that person again." Stunned at the deep tone, Yuri failed to form her rebuttal, and the green-haired boy spoke once more. "One strike, that's all I need. If I fail, I will come running back to you too and help. But I need this chance." To what? "Prove yourself," she stammered out. "Even if you blow up that thing with a single strike, what will you accomplish?" "It's not about what I accomplish." He grips his sword in his hand as he prepares to dash forward. "It's about doing whatever's right." And with that, he went off, sprinting at the robot with his sword drawn. Yuri only shakes her head, letting out a tired sigh. Why does everyone here seem to have a death wish? She wonders. Turning to the navy-haired teen, she makes a silent prayer. "God, please, if I become Recovery Girl's assistant, can I get some patients that are normal?" Unbeknownst to her, halfway across UAS campus in the medical ward, Recovery Girl freezes as she stitches up a wound before kissing her 78th patient, sensing a presence that felt sympathetic. "That's odd," she wondered. "It's almost as if I finally found someone who can understand my pain. One strike is all I need." Izuku thought, racing across the street as though his life depended on it. He prepared his blade, fidgeting with the blade in his grip akin to someone fingering the trigger of a gun. He had the mental image of his hand on the button clear as day. As he briefly glanced at the gleam of the blade, the greenish gold light reflecting off its edge, he was reminded once more of the cost of this stunt. Truth be told, Izuku had never planned on using his ult in the first place. Right from the beginning of the exam, he had limited himself to his shurikens along with about 20 uses of his normal ability. You see, the basic description of Izuku's quirk is that depending on how many hours he has on a certain character is how many hours he gets to use the character in real life. So his 60 hours on Genji should mean that he gets to use Genji in real life for 60 hours. In practice, however, Izuku's learned that there are many other factors that actually go into calculating how many hours he'd have left. For example, characters with other powers in addition to their normal abilities drain his hours faster. Characters with body types or species different to his own also drain hours, if it even lets him use the character at all. It's why characters like Maga, Master Chief, and Cloud were all difficult characters to use thanks to their body enhancement, and characters like Sonic, Kirby, and Winston were all off limits entirely due to them being a completely different species. Possibly the biggest factor, however, was the individual abilities, the various powers that specific characters had in video games that made them unique in the first place. The champions in League, the agents in Valorant, the various classes in Rainbow Six Siege all had different active skills, techniques that separated them from the rest of their cast, and while these abilities were Izuku's greatest asset, they also served to be one of the costliest aspects of his quirk. One extreme case of this is with Medic, when upon healing Bakugo and several dozen neighborhood kids in a snowball fight he accidentally activated his Uber charge on Bakugo. Even though he was quick to deactivate it, he discovered that upon returning home and opening up TF2 that a whole 30 hours for Medic was spent rather than a few minutes. After that realization, he immediately did everything he could to keep track of how many hours every ability for each character cost, keeping everything recorded in a separate notebook titled Ability Cost. He had spent so many hours field testing abilities, scribbling hasty notes, and spending so much screen time in various games that his mom actually banned him from games for a week and forced him to go outside. On the bright side, he did manage to get rid of his eye bags for a month or two before they inevitably came back. Either way, according to his journal, Genji was on the pricier side of things due to the extreme speed and dexterity needed for his abilities and the fact that he can double jump. So in reality, the 60 hours he has on Genji really only translates to 4 to minus 45 if he's actively moving. And if each dash took 15 minutes with each reflect taking close to 30, those 60 hours could be reduced to a couple very easily if he wasn't careful. He doesn't even have an idea how many hours Genji's ultimate would drain, but he would imagine that even a single swing with the ult would turn his 60 hours into 60 seconds. But as he looked at the endangered group at the mercy of the approaching behemoth, he decided it would be more than worth it. As he looked past the encroaching zero-pointer, he saw the brunette he saved earlier staring defiantly at the robot. Two utterly charred bodies laid next to her along with a twitching pile of smoke, all of them unconscious. All of the other examinees had long since fled. All of them were counting on him, and he was damned if he was gonna give up now. One strike is all I need, he repeated to himself once more. He was getting close, only 100 meters away now. He considered using a dash or two to close the distance even faster but decided against it. In order for him to pull this off, every single hour he had on Genji would matter. 50 meters. He was close enough to smell the steaming charcoal radiating off the two boys, burnt skin and ash causing his nose to wrinkle. One strike is all I need, he repeated. 40 meters. He drew in several deep breaths, counting each time he exhaled. One strike. 30 meters. The girl just saw him. He couldn't but smile under his cracked mask as she saw her hope rekindle in her eyes. One strike is all I need. 20 meters. His heart was beating, his mind pounding. One strike, he repeated. One strike is all I need. He briefly turned his gaze to the brunette before glaring back at the zero-pointer. This was it, the final boss. 10 meters. He dashed, shouting the iconic line associated with his ultimate as he put everything he had into slamming the mental gauge button. It was time he made sure to hold nothing back. Vibrations reverberated across the exam site as everyone involuntarily shuddered at the yell of the verdant samurai and the roar of the dragon of the north. Any and all teachers that weren't looking at Exam F had their full undivided attention on it as their widened eyes strained to capture every detail of what was about to transpire next. For a split moment, Izuku felt as though he could defeat all the top 10 heroes with a flick of his fingers and only the realm of the gods was left for him to conquer. Unrivaled power surged through Izuku's entire being as his vision was honed to a razor-sharp edge, his muscles becoming tauter than a bowstring as adrenaline more volatile and potent than a straight-up injection was pumped through every vein in his body. His senses extended beyond his body and merged into his sword as he twirled it around his shoulder, the metal being so attuned with his mind that it might as well have been an extra limb. Said extra limb burst open like a shining chrysalis as the dragon of the north came forth from the very tip, spooling out like a ribbon as it grew and stretched to nearly twice his size. As the spurt dragon opened its maw and roared, all that could be felt in the exam was an overwhelming presence that didn't just exude power, but defined it. He effortlessly twirled the blade around his arms. Despite having never used the ultimate before, the precise motions of the sword couldn't have felt more natural. The familiarity of the dragon being summoned by his movements, the rush and anticipation that came with the overwhelming amount of energy, all of it perfectly mimicked what it was like to use the ultimate in game for him. Maybe in that aspect, he did use the ultimate dozens of times before. Though, of course, there was no doubt that this ultimate in particular was the most important of them all. Rushing towards the robot with his final trump card activated, he was ready to cut down this null sector clone down to size. Loading cutscene. Uraraka had stopped trying to make sense of what was happening in front of her ages ago. Now she was more or less stun locked in place as she watched what transpired in front of her. "The dragon becomes me," he shouted. The very moment he did so, he pulled out his blade and twirled it around his shoulders, bright lights shining across the katana and his visor, his mask positively glowing with verdant energy. An entire dragon was summoned from his spinning blade, the spiritual creature flying around the tip as it radiated authority and demanded respect. The dragon roared, a colossal bellow that reached all across the arena. The sound was nothing short of earth-shaking, causing herself to shudder despite knowing the dragon was on their side. Flying across the blade as the swordsman expertly twirled the sword, the dragon seemed to glare its translucent eyes at the robot, baring its teeth as its featureless body coiled around the metal akin to a snake. It was only then the robot was able to turn to him, even managing to point its cannon at Izuku, but it was far too late. He dashed up onto the robot's arm like he did before. By then the dragon appeared to be absorbed into the sword, but that did not stop the radiation green light that was ever present. The zero-pointer attempted to slam a hand across its arm to catch the ninja, only for the opposing palm to be sliced in half with a single swing. Shhhrink. The sheer power in the arcing blade left an afterimage of a green curve in the air as it cleaved through the metal like butter. The upper half of its hand had fallen off, metal crashing into the street. Soon he had climbed up to the top of its right shoulder. Jumping upwards, he slashed down at the shoulder to dismember an entire limb, a downward cut that severed the robotic appendage right at the stump. The robot groaned as its right arm collided and fell onto the ground as well, before she could even blink. The other arm and the remaining rocket rack was gone too, leaving the robot nothing but a pair of legs, a torso, and a head. If she clumsily fell backwards on her, but she wasn't aware of it. She wasn't aware much of anything really besides the one-sided fight in front of her. It was one thing to see a stranger throw themselves in a bullet's path to deflect the shot, another to see three strangers work together to form a human shield for the sole express purpose of protecting you. But this wasn't a stranger protecting her anymore. At least, it didn't feel like it to her. This was someone whose gut instinct was to protect everyone he could, whose natural response to danger was to run into it head first to take it on and had the power to back it up. As she watched him take on the same robot that felled 100 examinees, actively winning the battle against the behemoth 1,000 times his weight and size, she couldn't help but think that this was what a hero looked like. From that day onwards, she would have the image of the green-haired teen firmly placed in her head as the go-to definition of what she considers a hero. Along with the video clip of 13 single-handedly evacuating an entire apartment building's worth of people with her quirk, the ninja then jumped backwards, performing a backflip or two in order to gain some distance. He was level with the robot's head. Uraraka sharply sucked in a breath as she realized what was about to transpire. No, surely he can't. As the ninja fell into the perfect position, he gripped his blade as he winded back his arm for the final strike. For the final time today, time slowed just enough for his next words to echo across the exam site. "Know yourself in the face of death," he muttered. Even though the voice itself was hardly louder than a whisper, it seemed to be carried around the fake city with ease. There was a bright green flash, along with the shink of the blade. She heard the sharp ripping of metal before everything suddenly stopped. A second passed. 2 seconds. The behemoth suddenly tipped backwards, a mighty crash as the very concrete cracked with the impact. Its head rolled off its shoulders before crashing down as well, the single light forming its eye flickering before finally whirring down and powering off. It's down, she thought with slack jaws. He actually managed to beat it. Overridden with adrenaline enough to make her openly laugh, she stood up, a giddy smile taking over her face. Her eyes searched for her savior only for the sight to wipe the smile off her face once more. And transformed and unconscious, she saw his body plummeting to the ground. Oh no, she thought. She sprinted forward before her mind could even process what she was doing. Desperately looking at the falling teenager, she tried her best to calculate where he was going to fall. No. She quickly muttered out, panicked, F. She looked up as she kept sprinting forward, seeing several medbots zooming down to try and catch him, but they were far too slow. They must have not been able to approach him earlier with the 0-pointer, and with him falling so suddenly there wasn't enough time to make up the distance. She wasn't going to make it. There was no way she was going to make it. She, lunging forward in a desperate attempt, she just managed to slap him across his cheek and activate her quirk. And that's time. The practical is now finished. Present Mike suddenly announced. Every examinee should head to the nearest exit and assist in sending any injured to the infirmary. If any of you little listeners are unable to move from where you are, don't worry, as staff or one of our medbots will come to pick you up shortly. He gives their thanks to all of you little listeners for all of your hard work and wishes you the best of luck. She couldn't even begin to register his announcement or the lurch in her stomach before she saw her verdant-haired teen floating harmlessly in front of her. Despite being frozen in place, her mind was racing. Stomach queasy, she barely managed to swallow back the vomit that threatened to spew forth from her mouth. If Yuri hadn't healed me, I wouldn't have been able to save him. Everyone's efforts would have been in vain. She thought, if I hesitated for even a moment, then I would have failed everyone here. My parents would disown me if they learned that I not only failed the exam but managed to get someone ended by doing so. Hell, none of us would even be here if I wasn't so stupid to get caught by the debris in the first place. I deserve to fail. Shaking her head, she disregarded the self-deprecation train that had arisen in her head. The exam was over and the robot was dead. That was all that mattered. Our release, she stuttered. The very moment she deactivated her quirk and the boy crashed to the ground, her stomach groaned once more as overwhelming nausea filled her once more. She immediately crumpled to all fours as she violently retched her breakfast. Vomit oozed on the floor before she finally managed to control herself. Dry heaving, she barely managed to raise her gaze from the ground. Her eyes eventually recognized the same green-haired boy that she greeted at the gate earlier. Maybe she should have been shocked at the reveal, but right now she was simply too exhausted to. Perhaps later on she would look back and muse how purely unintimidating the boy was. Mop of messy green hair with a chubby baby-like face still attached to a lean, while admittedly fit, body. But that was all for another time. Right now she was just glad it was all over. Still gagging a bit, she squinted her eyes to find a short, gray-haired nurse with a cane walking towards them. She donned a horrified expression on her face that only continued to grow in severity the more she looked around at the wrecked city. Uraraka had to repress a snort at what she said next. What the hell happened here? What the hell happened there? Midnight blubbered. There was a dragon. And then he jumped, and then, boom went the robot. Vlad whispered, just as astonished as Midnight. He didn't even. He just shouted Raijin no Ken wo Kri, and then decapitated the entire thing after slicing off its arms. The past 5 minutes have been nothing but the entire panel of judges avidly watching the spectacle in front of them. Granted, the past 15 minutes was nothing but one giant emotional roller coaster, as not only several miniature protests and riots erupted among the teachers, but a few even threatened to step out the door and have Present Mike end the exam early. It was without a doubt, however, that the past 5 minutes was where everything hit its peak, with one particular examinee stealing most of the spotlight. Such an incredible display of power, Cementos muttered, his stone face unable to properly portray the amount of shock in his voice, not to mention his control as well. Had we sent in a normal 0-pointer, it would have fallen within minutes, if not seconds. Why didn't the youngin use it earlier though? Snipe asked. Come to think of it, why didn't he just use it at the beginning and end the threat there and then? Didn't have enough energy perhaps? Midnight suggested. I can name quite a few pro heroes who require a build-up for their abilities. Fat Gum for example. Many quirks do have their limitations. 13 added. Given that he fell unconscious at the end, we can assume that he was hoping to use it as a last resort. It is still heroic nonetheless. Can affirmed. Agreed. Snipe confirmed. When was the last time we had a student single-handedly destroy the 0-pointer? I believe it was All Might, though I will note that he did so far more easily. Ectoplasm confirmed. After him, most examinees were only able to disfigure or temporarily disable it on their own. Some managed to even defeat it through teamwork. Looking back through the footage, examinee 2345 was also able to defeat the 0-pointer with assistance from examinee 2455. Ectoplasm's monotone voice didn't do justice for the absolute bombshell he just dropped. Several teachers could hear a record scratch as they were floored by Ectoplasm's sudden revelation. They were all so enraptured by the verdant samurai's performance that they completely missed most of the other examinees. Midnight summed up most of the teachers' reactions well. 2. Nimari screamed incredulously. We have 2 students who were able to destroy the 0-pointers, and they're both first years at that as well. Indeed, Ectoplasm confirmed. Still, it is important to note that the 0-pointer was never altered before. With its heavily increased speed and armor along with improved AI and weaponry, Examini 7345 feet is arguably even more impressive even if he had to be healed during the exam. HMPH. Considering the robot had a effing death ray strapped to its chest, I would be more surprised if the poor boy didn't need any healing. Midnight snarked, sending a scathing glare up at Nezu as she did so. I thought I nearly developed wrinkles when I saw the rockets alone, but this is a whole new level of insanity, even for you, Nezu. We should have listened to Majima when we had the chance. Snipe solemnly lamented. What happened to removing most of its lethal features? Nezu chuckled. I did. The original laser was able to carbonize steel. Several teachers blanched at this information. The only reason why it went as far as it did was because those 3 examinees stood in its path long enough for the heat to build up. Admirable of them, if not a little headstrong. Nothing that can't be fine-tuned once they enter the hero course. You're accepting them that quickly? Ken asked. Why, of course. Even without the rescue points, the 3 of them had enough score to make the cut anyhow. So I'm assuming that you're going to include Examini 7345 with them as well. Cementos queried. It would be quite a foolish decision to deny the one who felled the altered zero-pointer in only a few blows. Well, I don't see why not. Nezu happily chirped. He has shown exceptional prowess in the exam, having already obtained 44 villain points before the zero-pointer fiasco. Even if we didn't factor in the gargantuan amount of rescue points, he's already made it into the top 20. We couldn't deny him even if we wanted to. As the other teachers continued to commend and praise the green-haired student, 2 figures remained silent. A particularly scruffy-haired teacher in a jumpsuit scowled angrily at his paper as he scribbled down several notes. Right from when he charged at zero-pointer the first time, Aizawa had his suspicions about Midoriya Izuku, but the second time confirmed it. He had just identified his first future problem child for the year. Granted, his performance showed far more potential than the average examinee taker, popular to contrary belief from his coworkers. He would much rather have a reckless hero than a cowardly one, given that the former at least gave him something to work with. He demonstrated all the qualities that are required in heroics. Strong quirk, bleeding heart, evidence of prior training. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary besides his ludicrous amounts of self-sacrifice and having the power to actually back it up. He even displayed a decent amount of strategy and tactical thinking upon initially charging at the robot, aiming for the weak joints and eyes with his shuriken to perhaps blind or disable the robot. Aizawa didn't have any objections to Midoriya Izuku entering the hero course when it came to a lack of potential. On the contrary, he had it in spades. But then you get into the details and his actions later in the exam, and that's where every compliment he just gave turns quite sour. Not bad enough to retract anything he said, but just enough so that he can't confidently support his admission into the school anymore. First time he faced the zero-pointer, he saved the girl and rallied up the examinees to take on the metal behemoth. He used his abilities to not only attack the robot, but repel the robot's own harmlessly with very little property damage or effort to himself. Even Aizawa nodded in commendation at these actions. Had he stopped there, he would have been in full support of adding him to the Wano roster and been looking forward to exploring just what his limits and capabilities were. But then he was inevitably injured. Okay, that was expected. He's not invincible, and he deliberately threw himself in the line of fire to draw away the robot's attention from the others. He did his best to evade as many attacks as possible and only choose to engage when the robot displayed a weapon capable of wiping out entire crowds of examinees. A weapon that had to be taken out at all costs lest it meant the end for him and potentially far more people. Had the zero-pointer not been altered to release that missile barrage, he might have docked points for him taking such a great risk when the smartest option was to run and regroup. But even he had to admit Nezu had gone overboard with the design of the zero-pointer. With the rocket strapped to its ankles, there was no running from that machine. He could have stopped and continued laying down on the floor. Recovery Girl could have healed him once the exam ends, and no one would fault him for laying down when he was spiked harder than a volleyball by a colossal metal fist. But then he was healed, and unnecessarily so. While he will not fault and Yuri for going out of their way to restore him, seeing they could have easily mistaken him for grievously wounded and panicked as a result, he will almost certainly fault Midoriya Izuku for what transpired next. Others might see his display of power as something to marvel, something to adore, something that would be an instant ticket to the hero course. Aizawa saw it as nothing more than an adrenaline-fueled attempt to sate his self-sacrificial tendencies that was only successful due to the 1 in a million chance that Uraraka caught him with her own quirk. It was either that or the boy was simply not thinking in the slightest, which wasn't much better from a potential hero student candidate. Hell, if it wasn't for his school reports noting him as more humble than most house mice, he could have interpreted his actions as if he was in it for the glory, only saving the girl for the sake of his ego. Oh sure, you could make the excuse that the robot was possibly going to fire upon Uraraka and the rest of them, and that he thought he responded appropriately. In that aspect, he would agree. But if that was the case, answer him this. Why did he have to go so far as to climb up the robot till he was 60 feet in the effing air? Why didn't he just slice apart his legs and cause him to fall, or dash in front of them to deflect the shots as he did previously? Why didn't he simply dismember the robot and climb down? If he had to use whatever that final ability was, then why not use it to disarm the robot and climb down? Why, on God's earth, did he have to go so far as to decapitate the robot for anything other than style points when the thing was already disarmed? This is what caused him to start rubbing the bridge of his nose in frustration and pray for Nezu to send him to 1B instead. Because even if you could attempt to argue in his defense, pointing out his inexperience, or that it was an action in the heat of the moment, he had one rebuttal. Where in his plan was he planning to save himself had he confronted the zero-pointer, if he even considered it at all? At least with Examine 2345, he had enough energy left to glide down after he destroyed it. Granted, it was a shaky and rough flight, but he was able to save himself nonetheless. With him, what excuse could there possibly be besides an entire lack of forethought? Or far worse, impulse. Stupidity was one thing, but if it was an impulse decision that drove him to sacrifice himself twice now, just like he did. Aizawa kept his eyes closed for a second, deeply inhaling through his nose as his mind unwillingly conjured up images of floating sky blue hair and an aviator jacket. Then he would be better off disqualifying him and sending him to Gen Ed until he knew better, for his good and everyone who cares about him as well. He would not have a hero student who would build bridges and roads to safety for civilians using their own bones as the brick and the blood as the cement. He would not have another Oboro in his classroom when he has the ability to do something about it. But ignoring the reckless tendencies of this generation of teenagers, there was still the situation of the unsatisfactory reasoning that Nezu had for replacing the zero-pointers. While the other staff may be fine with chalking it up to Nezu's sadistic nature and nothing else, Aizawa knew far better to take anything he says at face value. He knew damn well that Nosy Rodent had a plan, and he was going to find out exactly what it was. "Yo, Aizawa," Nimori called out to him. "What's going on? You've been doing nothing but brooding up there." "I was simply thinking, Nimori," he hummed, slightly annoyed. Nothing more. It seemed that he had his own investigation to do in his own time, away from the prying eyes of the rat. Meanwhile, a sickly figure kept his eyes locked on the screen, fear and horror transfixed on his face. No, it's not possible. It can't be. All Might reasoned with himself. I ended that damn bastard years ago. For him to foster a successor would be nothing short of impossible. Little did he know that had he read Midoriya's file beyond virtual embodiment, he would have found his quirk description and its abilities right underneath the quirk name. But as of now, he is left staring at the unconscious teen with a both unsure and terrified expression on his face, unknowing of Nezu watching him from above, who only sighed and shook his head in disappointment. "Izuku, Katsuki," Inko called out. "Your letters are he." Not even seconds after the words left her mouth, rapid pattering footsteps sounded from the Izuku's bedroom, followed by the two boys practically shouldering each other to receive their letter first. This inevitably led to several curses from both, as the smaller space of the apartment wasn't able to support much roughhousing. "Oi, get out of the way," Bakugo hissed. "I called dibs, remember," Izuku reminded him. "And I told you dibs doesn't mean SHO." Bakugo swore as he briefly clutched his heel. "Sorry, I swear that was an achi-oof." Izuku proceeded to trip onto the floor as his socks couldn't handle the transition from wood to tile well and slip. "Watch where you're going, nerd," Bakugo scolded him. Inko released an impossibly fond sigh as he watched the two boys eventually manage to clamber over each other, and eventually managed to reach the seats besides the kitchen counter. Briefly panting in minor exhaustion, they both stared up at Inko with wide expectant eyes. "So," Izuku started. "Where is it?" Bakugo finished. Inko rolled her eyes fondly at both of them before pulling out the cards, one in each hand. "Don't rip them open too fast, boys. I still have to get the camera. Just wait a moment, all right." She would have had Mitsuki and Masaru with her in the house, but with a delayed photoshoot regarding their fashion business having come up last minute, they profusely begged her to take a video of them opening the letters and share it to them instead. She, of course, obliged and told Bakugo of his parents' absence. While he was briefly disappointed, he assured them that he would have his own celebration with both his dad and the hag later. They eagerly nodded and each took a letter with their respective names, hands shaky and eyes gleaming with anticipation. Making a show of rummaging through several cabinets, she eventually pulls out one of Hisashi's old Shutterstock cameras. It was an old antique when her husband briefly entertained a side hustle in photography, only to realize that his lifetime of writing notes made it nearly impossible to take a picture with his constantly twitching fingers. Filtering through some of the photos stored in the film, she couldn't help but muse over some of the similarities between Hisashi and her son. Granted, Izuku took more after her given his doe-like eyes and his bright green hair compared to Hisashi's calculating gaze and ashen black arrow of a dew, along with the hereditary mutation of his tear ducts being far stronger than normal. But the moment you squint you can see that personality-wise he took after Hisashi, the rapid mutters he did when analyzing quirks, the undying determination when he set his mind to something. And who could forget his massive appetite? Chuckling, she briefly remembered the times when she attempted to breastfeed Izuku for the first time, only for him to continue suckling long after her reserves were empty and stamina completely drained. It was after that exhausting night that she swore to stick to baby formula no matter what and buy a dozen bottles of it weekly. Even then Izuku continued to maintain his large appetite until preschool, where he moderated himself after his 4th birthday, only to kick it up to another gear when his quirk came in. Given how he tells her how much stamina the power takes out of him and how often he practices with it, it makes sense that he more often than not takes seconds or thirds during dinner or lunch. She is more than happy to provide, of course. Ever since she married Hisashi, preparing food for 3 or more people is something she was well accustomed to with his dragon-sized appetite. She suddenly froze with the camera in her grip, her mind unwillingly summoning vivid memory after memory of her late husband, along with that damn night. Heart-splitting images caused her to press her lips tight and resist the urge to balk as she remembered the harsh words yelled, the slam of the door, and the police officer showing to the door with hat in hand and solemn expression on his face. "Come on, Auntie," Bakugo complained. "We can't wait forever, you know." Inko managed to shake her head to escape the rabbit hole she dug herself in. Now was not the time for those sorts of thoughts. Today is supposed to be a happy day for her, Katsuki and Izuku, absolutely nothing else. It didn't matter whether her son failed or not. She would support him in whatever he did regardless. Right, of course. She reformed her smile to the best of her ability as she turned on the camera, lightly polishing the lens with her sleeve. Taking a few moments to adjust the frame until both boys were in the frame, she hit record. "All right, who wants to open theirs first?" Izuku went to raise his hand before realizing Bakugo had already ripped into his package the moment Inko started recording. "Hey," Izuku objected, glaring at his friend who only cackled in response with his hand reaching deep into the packet. "Ha, eat it, slowpoke." Bakugo gleefully snickered, before quickly becoming confused by the package's contents. "Huh, what the?" Bakugo pulled out a metal disc much to each boy's confusion. It was big enough to fit in both of his palms. "What is it?" Izuku asked. "You think I have a clue?" Bakugo snorted, turning the disc around in his palm as he inspected it for any buttons. "Damn frisbee doesn't even have instructions on how to turn it on." "You're probably looking at the wrong side then. Here, let me take a look." Izuku reached over for the disc before Bakugo pulled away. "Hell no," Bakugo snapped, immediately putting it out of the greenette's reach. "Go open your own damn frisbee." "Oh come on, stop being ridiculous. Just pass it here for a quick second." Izuku continued to grab for the metal disc over and over again, each attempt remaining unsuccessful as Bakugo either slapped the opposing palm away or stretched his arm just out of Izuku's range. "Mother, back off, Deku. Will you please let me just... I blow your effing head off." Inko repressed another sigh as she moved to reprimand them when Bakugo accidentally fumbled the disc in his hand and caused it to drop to the ground. "Shit." Bakugo quickly went over to pick the disc back up when a holographic video was suddenly projected a few feet above the disc. "Greetings, young Bakugo. I am here as a projection," the very large face of All Might boisterously announced, the projected screen barely covering the entire upper half of his hulking frame as he posed with hands on hips. His booming voice easily filled the room as if he was standing in it himself. "Allow me to properly introduce myself. I am All Might recording live from UIS halls, and I hope you are doing well." Jaws dropped to the floor, clattering on the ground forgotten as they took in the sight in front of them. Eyes were open wider than dinner plates as they all took in the #1 hero in all his glory. As if somehow sensing their surprise through the screen, All Might laughed. His booming voice almost sounded like he was present in the room itself. "HA. Now I know you may be asking yourself, why am I delivering your letter?" "Yes, why?" Izuku shouted at his idol, temporarily forgetting about the fact that the projection is only a recording and nothing more. Bakugo ignored him. "Well, the answer is simple. As of this new school year, I will be part of UA faculty, to educate and teach the new generation of heroes just what it means to be a symbol of peace." "We knew it," both Bakugo and Midoriya exclaimed at the same time. Inko still too busy processing everything else that was happening in her living room to ask what they meant. "But enough chit-chat. Let us get to your scores." All Might brought his palms together in a mighty clap before stepping further back in the background. "First, the written exam. You scored a high 88 in this portion of the test. Nothing short of very impressive, young Bakugo. However, that is nothing compared to your practical exam, where you scored an astonishing 57 villain points, an unmatched result that alone would earn you your place in the hero course." Izuku gasped, immediately grabbing his friend by a shoulder and shaking it rapidly in glee and excitement. His smile was stretched from cheek to cheek. "Bakugo, you got in." Bakugo tried to play off with a soft-hearted scoff, but even he couldn't prevent the cocky grin that spread across his face. "Course I got in. What do you expect, nerd? He instantly wrapped an arm around Izuku's neck and shoulder before pulling him in, his other hand in a fist to noogie him. The two of them laughed as Bakugo's fist rubbed on Izuku's fluffy mop of hair, and Ko chuckling softly from behind the camera in pride. But that is not the only thing we were looking out for. All Might suddenly interrupted, dread striking both of the teens' hearts simultaneously. No. What if we're to tell you that there was a second secret system of obtaining points? Here, take a look. The screen quickly transitioned over to drone shot from exam area C, where the zero-pointer was actively rampaging throughout the streets. While there was audio in the recording, it seemed to be heavily muted, sensible given the large amount of destruction occurring at the moment. Oh my goodness. Inko pressed a hand to her lips as she looked upon the screen. Did you have to fight that during the exam? What is that school thinking? Relax, auntie, that extra was optional, Bakugo assured her. Even if I wanted to fight that thing, it was worth 0 points anyway. Had this been his mom and not Inko, he would have instantly confirmed the dangers of the robot and how he easily blasted through the tin can with little trial or tribulation whatsoever. But he figured out early on that over-exaggerating dangers to Inko was nothing but a surefire way to get her to both scold and obsess over you, while also flooding the apartment and blowing through tissues faster than Ingenium's mother in a Black Friday sale in the process. It was much worse than Mitsuki's yelling. At least with the former, you knew she would eventually calm down. With Inko, she would give heartbreaking looks of betrayal for days after that stung much more than any slap ever could. It was just a rest that neither Izuku or Bakugo wished to go through. Well, it better be. Inko started. I know it's the #1 hero school, but having kids face that monstrosity is ridiculous. Bakugo barked out a laugh. Yeah, I know, right? I mean, what kind of idiot would fight that thing? He added that last part, figuring that the audio would cut away far sooner than it did and that he would be safe. Of course, he didn't realize just how quickly he would eat those words, as the screen zoomed into focus on the robot and the mass destruction and panic it was causing. Izuku hummed, slightly tilting his head as he got a closer look at the screen. That's odd. The one you guys had looked nothing like the one in our area. Compared to the one he faced, it was nearly twice the size, but lacked most if not all of its original weapons in trade for 2 fists. Maybe yours was defective, Bakugo snarked, but his attention quickly returned to the screen when the camera zoomed on a pink-skinned examinee with her leg trapped under rubble. She was splashing large puddles of pink acid at the concrete that ate at the material far too slowly. She must have exhausted her reserves earlier in the exam. Bakugo's eyes widened as he realized what was about to happen next. Rapidly bleeding out mental curse words, beads of sweat started formulating on his forehead as he contemplated how he could possibly edit the footage by staring at it hard enough. Sadly, he realized his fate was sealed when a blonde teenager with a black lightning streak down the side of his hair ran forward and desperately tried lifting the concrete slab and futile. He tried several more times when the camera panel suddenly started violently shaking. The drone turned its angle to focus down a familiar ashen blonde face, explosions from his palms propelling him through the air. His eyes, gleaming wild with murder and brazen smile, were unmistakable now. Bakugo gulped, refusing to look at Inko as he watched his past self maliciously grin, baring all of his teeth as he aimed an explosion through a small hole made with his fingers and fired. The concentrated blast collided directly with the zero-pointer's chest. Stumbling back, the robot managed to catch itself by grabbing onto a few nearby buildings. Bakugo immediately started barking out orders as he landed next to the pair, both looking upon him with awe as he blasted apart the slab with ease. He initiated a brief conversation with them, presumably asking about their quirks given the demonstration by both, the girl waving her hand to summon a small splash of acid while covering his hand in electricity. Once done, he took a moment to think before ordering the girl to run to the exit, before pointing at the boy and directing his attention to the quickly recovering robot. Both initially objected, the girl's determined expression contrasting the boy's justifiably hesitant and fearful one, but were both silenced by a harsh glare and a snarl. They eventually nodded, the girl limping away and the blonde following behind Bakugo as they approached the foot of the zero-pointer, holding up 5 fingers as what they would assume as a countdown. Bakugo proceeded to fly up, drawing the attention of the robot away from the blonde teen before starting to blast himself in very specific directions. Izuku's eyes widened as he recognized the move, or at least the setup. He knew that Bakugo had yet to actually use it, but even if half the theory Izuku proposed was true, no, the blowback would be too harsh without the proper training and reinforcement. Surely he wouldn't be this reckless, right? He soon had to swallow that thought as Bakugo began to rapidly spin in the air, the combined heat and light forming a twister of popping explosions and burning fire. The camera was forced to look away as Bakugo, if he was somehow still in there managing to continuously power the thing, became too bright to look at. Howitzer, Bakugo started, his scream being hard to make out by the constant crackling explosions and howling winds. Impact. The robot backed away for a few seconds, briefly intimidated by the entire display before charging forward. Just as it was about to hit, however, large beams of yellow electricity suddenly arced along the entire body of the robot. Metal peeled off the zero-pointer as the electric discharge ripped apart the frame and caused it to groan. Izuku almost felt sympathetic for the robot when the electricity ended to leave its body scorched and partially sparking. Bakugo chose to send his orange twister in a direct impact with the zero-pointer's face. Despite all the action occurring with the robot collapsing as its face was blasted apart, the explosion being so big that the camera feed cut out as it was caught in the explosion, a very audible die, but still heard right before the camera was ruptured. The living room was silent as the screen switched to All Might, not even the hero's presence being able to distract them. As you can see, you not only demonstrated intimidating levels of destructive power, you were able to use this power with your colleagues to collaborate and take down a threat that posed danger to all. All Might concluded. And what kind of hero school would we be if we didn't endorse such selfless behavior? Inko was silent, trembling with wide eyes as she stared blankly at All Might's wide smile. Both Izuku and Katsuki gulped as they glanced at her expression, trying desperately to get a read on what she could possibly be thinking. Her face seemed to be stuck in a permanent expression of shock. All Might continued regardless. It is because of this heroic deed that we have decided to reward you an additional 40 rescue points, putting your score to a total of 97, earning a joint first place in the entrance exam. All Might suddenly extended his hand to the screen in an open handshake. Welcome, Bakugo Katsuki. This is your Hero Academia. The disc shut off with a beep, leaving Inko alone with her son and a very anxious Bakugo Katsuki at her mercy. In any other circumstance, they would have been whooping and cheering on Bakugo's performance, Izuku marveling over his friend's strength while his friend talked his feet down and silently basked in the praise. But to do so was to risk a flood proportions equal to when Izuku redeclared his friendship with Bakugo all those years ago. Considering that the insurance companies were already being stretched on their already worn patients, they had to be very careful of how they would approach this. Well, Izuku thought so at least. All Bakugo could think about were nearby escape routes. Swallowing as he mentally tested and ruled out various options. The door, back door, and attic were all unviable. One twist of a knob from Inko's quirk and the door would be locked. Defenestration would be an option, but he would have to open the closed windows first before flying out. And he wasn't willing to test Inko's reaction time and see how fast she could slam the rail on his fingers. He wasn't going to blast the windows open. No way in effing hell is that an option. God could condemn him to hell himself, where the devil could drag him through a field of nails before he would face Inko after destroying something with his explosion. He repressed a shudder as he remembered when he accidentally broke a vase with his explosions when he was 5 at Auntie's house. While his mom may have yelled and hit him a little bit, Inko's glare alone was enough to make him swear up and down that he wouldn't be using his quirk in her household so long as he lived. Bakugo looked at Inko's expression of shock before looking at Izuku hopefully, only to be met with a rapidly shaking head, Izuku mouthing out "no way" over and over again. He cursed. Of course the nerd wouldn't be of any help. He probably did something even more stupid during the exam, and even then he couldn't do sit against his own mom. Bakugo eventually sighed and faced Inko. He started. But much to his surprise, Inko interrupted him by blurting out, "That was amazing." Bakugo and Izuku both blinked several times. They were tempted to rub their eyes, go to the eye doctor for a prescription, and purchase whatever contact lenses or glasses were necessary to dispel this illusion. Assuming that they would do so, however, would be assuming they want to break the illusion in the first place, which they did not. Really? Bakugo asked incredulously. Inko nodded, her eyes still wild and ecstatic. Yes, I mean I've seen you and Izuku at the Quirk gym, but I never knew that Mitsuki's boy would become strong. I mean all of that was. And you worked with others too. Bakugo, for once, was at a loss for words. His usual brash behavior was completely kicked to the curb as he struggled to respond. I guess. I just asked them to see if they could help, you know. It's not like it would have stopped me from charging at the damn thing anyway. Still, the fact that you asked for help. Inko looked at Bakugo with wonder and astonishment as if he somehow managed to build a staircase to the moon. Even Mitsuki still has trouble asking anything from anyone. And yet you, Izuku cut in. Okay, sorry to interrupt, but I gotta ask, you're not worried? Bakugo death glared at Midoriya as Inko sheepishly rubbed the back of her head. Well, I wouldn't say that. It's just not really my place to tell Mitsuki about what risk her child takes, right? And besides, despite how dangerous choosing to fight that robot was, I know that as heroes you'll need to face risks like that on a daily basis to save someone, which you did. No, the blame should be on you for even letting that thing near anyone your age. But right now, I'm just really happy for you. Yeah, I guess. Bakugo grumbled. I am just surprised you're taking this all so well, Auntie. Oh, I'm not. I hardly am, Inko assured him. Trust me, if that was Izuku's exam, I would have gone through 3 tissue boxes by now while scolding him to no end. Albeit I would be proud of my son for being so strong in the first place. While I know you all want to be heroes, there should be no reason that any kids as young as you should have to face that before you've even gotten into the school. Fair, Izuku mumbled. But I saw how you saved that girl. And as All Might put it, you were nothing short of a true hero there. Inko gently grabbed Bakugo's hand, rough and calloused from continuous use of his explosions, and placed it open in her palm. She smiled at the blonde. No, I wasn't worried for your safety, Katsuki. I know you can handle yourself after all. I just simply can't believe how much you've changed, and for the better no less. So many years since I've forgiven you for what you've done to Izuku, and yet here I am still finding reasons that I made the right choice. Inko's voice was shaky as rivers threatened to burst from her eyes from the sheer amount of emotion in her voice. I am proud of you, Katsuki. Congratulations on passing your exam. By this point, tears were openly flowing down her cheeks and Bakugo wasn't much better. Visibly shaken by these words, he had his mouth agape before eventually swallowing and accepting the praise with a nod. He didn't trust himself to voice out a reply to what she said lest it came out choked or hoarse. He just didn't understand how he could receive so much praise for his quirk or his skills or his high grades. And yet Inko's words meant more to him than any compliments from an extra in school or even his own parents. The moment was instantly ruined when the green-haired gremlin wrapped an arm around his shoulder and brought him close. Awa, is Kakin finally going soft? I'm so proud of how far you've come too. Bakugo instantly regained his violent smirk as he broke off from the grapple and repaid Izuku with a grab of his own, earning a surprised yelp in return from the greenette. You keep your damn mouth shut, Zuku. First chance I get in UA I'ma blow your ass to kingdom come. Izuku paused. You're that confident I got in. Bakugo scoffed at the notion of Izuku possibly failing. Unless you took a effing freaking nap in the exam, nerd, then yes, you got in. Oh right. Inko quickly picked up Izuku's forgotten package from the kitchen counter before tearing it open with a pair of scissors. Izuku seemed pretty exhausted when he came home, so I'm assuming he put on quite the show. Izuku froze, his eyes widening just as Bakugo had done earlier. He had forgotten to actually tell his mother about what happened in his exam. Genji's ultimate having drained him of his stamina for an entire week afterwards. A weekend after the exam, he was basically bedridden for a day and a half, too tired to lift even a finger above his bedsheet covers. When he recovered and was able to attend the last few weeks of school, he still looked as if he had pulled 5 all-nighters in a row. His eye bags tracked deeper than a person with an insomnia quirk, with his mind emitting more static than Mr. Gaiman Sensei, the teacher with a literal TV head. Of course, his mom and Bakugo were concerned about what had happened in the exam to leave him in such a state, but he had constantly reassured them that he was fine and that a student's quirk had misfired and greatly drained him of his stamina, causing him to black out. While his mom might have bought into it, Bakugo wasn't so easily convinced, hashing him about it at every possible opportunity. Unfortunately for him, Izuku remained as silent as a mouse, leaving Bakugo's pestering unsuccessful up until now. Unaware of Midoriya's internal panicking, Bakugo rolled his eyes. Exhausting is putting it lightly. The damn nerd's forehead might as well have been glued to the freaking desk at school. Good thing we didn't have any homework or whatnot, since I'm pretty sure he tied himself to his bed the second he got home. Inko sighed. He might as well have. I still have no clue what kind of mental quirk has the ability to exhaust another so much. And before Izuku could protest, Inko opened the packaging and turned on the exam disc before playing the video recording. This one was recorded by Nezu instead of All Might, causing both Bakugo's and Inko's eyebrows to raise in surprise while Izuku silently bemoaned not having All Might announce his test scores. Am I a mouse, a bear, perhaps a dog? Nezu started. Well, one thing is for certain, I am the principal of UA High School. The small family watched intensely as he went on the same speech that All Might did, revealing Izuku's higher exam score of 92 while having a smaller score in the practical of 44 points. Of course, Izuku wasn't concerned about Bakugo's mock goading or if he got in. Rather, he was in the process of praying that Nezu was the type to skip over dramatics and simply announce his points without playing any videos from his entrance exam. Nezu then played 3 different videos showcasing his entrance exam. The footage in excellent and far better quality than Bakugo was, and paired with audio so they can hear very well Izuku shouting plus ultra as he led the examinees to charge at the robot. They saw in perfect 4K clarity how he got spiked into the ground at 70 miles per hour and was barely conscious. And of course they saw him charge at the robot shouting Genji's ultimate, shining Virescent blade raised as he took on the mechanical behemoth. When the video ended, Nezu popped up once more. As you can see, Midoriya's performance showed not only unmatched heart and drive, his current abilities make him one of the most powerful examinees that we have observed. With that said, it brings me great joy to tell you that you passed the exam with a total of 97 points, 53 rescue points boosting you to a joint first place. Well done, and we look forward to your attendance soon enough. Have a good day. Once the video clip shut off, the family stayed silent for approximately 3 more seconds, right when Mama Midoriya burst into tears and proceeded to nearly flood the apartment. Bakugo barely had enough time to scream out, "Hit the deck," before both him and Midoriya were swept away and slammed into the living room walls. Once most of the water was drained out and Izuku finally managed to somewhat calm his mom down, his mother made him swear up and down not to pull off another stunt like that again if he could help it before congratulating him on his successful entrance. The celebrations proceeded to go into full swing, Inko pulling out 2 miniature cakes and taking one final picture with the camera. The photo showed Midoriya choking on a large piece of cheesecake with his cheeks puffed up as big as a chipmunk's. Bakugo offered his support in the form of cackling at his friend's misfortune, while Inko suppressed her chuckles behind her sleeve. As they repeated the same celebrations at the Bakugos later that week, both Izuku and Bakugo knew only one thing: Yue wasn't going to know what hit it. Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed the video just leave a like, and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.